just genetic, it's just your body, then why is it that we have a far greater number of Hashimoto's patients now than we did 20 years ago? I took postgraduate immunology, and it has never been proven that the body can attack itself.
So how many carbs do we need?
0.
But vegetable is good, right, doctor?
Well, they all have different toxins in them. Most of them will kill you. Pediatricians, if they get 85% of their kids fully vaccinated, they get a bonus. 90% or 95%, those bonuses go up. Trillions of dollars that they made in profit where they knowingly put a product on the market that killed people, that they knew killed people. And the drug companies are doing this as well. There are absolutely ways of getting money to doctors without people knowing about it. If you reward treating symptoms, you'll get a system that treats symptoms. If you reward curing disease, then you'll get a system that treats and cures the root cause of disease. These so-called autoimmune diseases have been shown to be caused by...
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hashimoto's Reset podcast. Today, I have Dr. Anthony Chafee with me. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you on. Talk about who you are and what you do.
I'm a medical doctor specializing in neurosurgery. I've since stepped out where I treat chronic diseases and get to the root cause of illnesses and use a lot of diet and lifestyle interventions to reverse issues as opposed to just papering them over with medications. I've studied nutrition, how that affects health and chronic disease for a number of years. And it certainly works a lot better than a lot of these medicines because, of course, those medicines just allows you to live with a condition as opposed to treating the condition. So now I'm able to actually help people.
I love to hear that. I had Hashimoto's before. I also went carnivore and things started to change. But you also train other athletes and you have been an athlete yourself.
Yeah, I've been a lifelong athlete ever since I was a kid, and I was always very interested in how I could best fuel my body. So I always ate very clean. I was an All-American rugby player, Division I rugby in university and then professionally. And so I came across a carnivore diet when I was in my early 20s. It radically changed my fitness and performance and how I felt. I didn't really actually think about how much of an impact just getting rid of plants and only eating meat had on my body and performance until I started going back to an approach with a lot of meat, but also having not really fruits, but vegetables, a bit of carbs here and there. But it was a massive difference. And I couldn't figure out what had made that difference until years later when I stopped eating vegetables again and just had this massive resurgence in how I felt and my ability as an athlete. So I played professional rugby for 10 years before medical school, and 5 of those years were on 100% carnivore, 0 carbs. And after that, why don't I feel as superhuman amazing? I guess I'm 25 now, I'm old, I'm dying, and my body's just breaking down, which doesn't make any sense because you don't see that anywhere else in the animal kingdom.
Exactly.
But that's what you're told, and so that's what you get convinced because I'm not performing as well. That must be it. And so that's when I started really looking into this and okay, what do we know? What can we prove? Humans just are carnivores as a species. That's just biologically what we are. So you have to feed your body what it's biologically adapted for. And as a doctor, so I started looking at medicine through that lens and realizing we're not eating to our biological design. And all of a sudden, chronic disease and these illnesses and why everyone's getting sicker, that started making a lot more sense. Since then, I've started working with a lot of professional athletes, some of the top pros in the world, and they're finding the exact same massive improvements that I saw as well. And now we're starting to see randomized controlled trials in athletes, recreational athletes, high performance athletes, elite world-class athletes. And again and again, that you don't need carbohydrates to perform at an elite level. In fact, it may be a detriment as well.
Yeah, exactly. I want to deep dive a little bit into autoimmunity and thyroid issues soon, but you look very young, strong, and healthy. People can pause the video right now to guess in the comments how old you really are. But I thought you were 10 years younger.
Yeah, I just turned 46 because I still feel 22. In fact, I feel better now than I did at 26 playing professional rugby, but not eating carnivore. When I went back onto carnivore when I was 38, within a few weeks, I could actually perform like I did at 22 again. And I look at pictures of myself at 35. I look younger now, and I certainly feel better.
Yeah. And I'm 27, and I feel better now than I did at 19, because that's when I started to get like pains in the joints. Changing my diet made the biggest difference. And for my mother, she was sick ever since I was a kid. So my whole
Mm.
life, I saw her suffering. I saw my grandmother suffering. And so when I realized that I had Hashimoto's just as them, then I already knew that the allopathic conventional system, it wouldn't give me any relief. I would end up at the same place as they had. And I did everything following the guidelines, how you should be healthy. And still, I ended up at the same place. And when I asked the doctors, they said, all you can do is take a lifetime of meds. But I already had seen that. So I knew it wasn't going to work. So I had to find another approach. And this was the only thing that worked. It worked in more ways than I thought it would. I think you have seen it too with patients, athletes. Like everyone is just getting more optimal health, less intervention they have, and the more they focus on nutrition.
Yeah. And that's the thing. If you need more and more medication, then by definition, you're getting more and more sick. You're
Yeah.
not getting healthier. And we forget that as doctors, even and as patients, that if you have to put a patient on more medication, that means they're getting worse. Yes, you're helping them, but you're not making them better. And that's sort of the model now. You get worse, we put you on more medication. You continue to get worse, you continue to get put on more medication. That's not helping people. And sure, it's better than nothing. And if we don't have any other way of helping somebody, then yeah, but we should at the same time be looking for the root cause. Why is someone getting Hashimoto's? Well, it's just genetic. It's just your body. Well, then why is it that we have a far greater number of Hashimoto's patients now than we did 20 years ago? I mean,
Mhm.
it's just 20 years. Well, we're better at diagnosing now. No, we're not. We had the exact same test then as we do now. And you can look at this very simply. The number one cause of hypothyroidism 20 years ago, 30 years ago was not Hashimoto's. It is now. Back then it was dietary mostly because you have a lack of iodine, or you were eating too many vegetables that had goitrogens that would block out iodine uptake in the thyroid. And even when
Yeah.
I was in medical school, Hashimoto's was not the number one cause of hypothyroidism. Now it is. And so this is getting more severe. I have over 100 patients with Hashimoto's, and I've seen that nutritional interventions are far and away the best way of treating Hashimoto's or any autoimmune disease,
Mm.
because it's been argued by professors of immunology going back in the 1980s that autoimmune conditions are not actually the body attacking themselves. We've just labeled them autoimmune, the body's attacking itself, and we've stopped looking for any other explanation. We've just accepted this is what it is. It's inside the box thinking. This is autoimmune. That's all it can ever be. Don't look anywhere else. Just
Yeah.
stay right here. Okay. Outside the box thinking is, what if it isn't autoimmune? What if the body's not attacking itself? What if something else is going on? And these are immunologists. Their entire career revolves around this. And
Yeah.
they were saying, like a Dr. Freed, Freed, published in 1991, an entire paper saying, look, the body actually can't attack itself. And it has never been satisfied and proven that the body can attack itself. And it is not possible for it to do so. But he was showing that all of these consequences in these so-called autoimmune diseases
Yeah.
have been shown to be caused by plant lectins, which are defensive chemicals that plants make to prevent animals from eating them. Since the 1970s, we've known since the 1970s what lectins do in the body. They can latch onto your cells, they can damage them, they can trigger an immune response so that your body then attacks. Really, they're trying to attack the lectins, but they're attached to a cell, so the cell gets damaged. They can coat a cell to where now the body doesn't even recognize it. And we see this in autoimmunity that's precipitated by medication. So you have medications that you take, and in some people that are susceptible, they might bind to cells like your red blood cells, and they coat them entirely. Now your body can't even see that this is your own cell. It looks like an invader, and sort of
Yeah.
attacks it and kills it. And simple solution, you stop taking the medication, problem stops. Even though those antibodies stay active for years afterwards, there's no damage unless you're taking the medication and coating your cells and causing this sort of damage. So the same thing can happen with lectins. And we see this with other autoimmune issues like celiac. Most people don't even realize that celiac is an autoimmune disease, but it's now called a gluten-mediated autoimmune disease because it only happens and occurs when you eat gluten. Gluten is not a lectin, but it acts in the same way as lectins, and it can bind to these cells, cause damage, cause them to signal to the immune system to say, hey, I'm compromised, kill me. And the body can attack these these gluten molecules, and then your cells get hit in the crossfires.
Mm.
And when you stop eating gluten, all the damage stops, and the gut lining can heal within 4 to 6 weeks, even though
Yeah.
those antibodies stay elevated for over 3 years after your
Mm.
last exposure to gluten. So that's clearly not an autoimmune condition. That's
No.
clearly not your body attacking itself, because I took postgraduate immunology in my undergraduate degree, and that was very clear. The body can't do that. And so the explanation in that same book for autoimmune disease was, yeah, the body can't attack itself. It's not really capable of it, and there's all these stop gaps. If you have an immune cell this as being matured, this tests against every single antigen that your body's capable of making. And if it reacts even weakly to any of these things, it's killed. So it's actually
Yes.
not capable of making an antibody that attacks your body. It's not possible. And so they say, well, something went wrong. We don't know what it is. We can't prove it, but that's probably what's going on. It's like,
Mhm.
all right,
Mhm.
well, that's not very clever. That's an assumption. It's
Yeah.
never been proven. And in fact, we have other explanations that are far better. So like with Hashimoto's, as I was taught and is still taught today, this is a progressive disorder. Your body's just sensitized to your thyroid. It will eventually kill it. And then you'll have to get your thyroid removed, or it's a cancer risk. And then
Yeah.
you're just going to be on medications the rest of your life. Same thing. It's not
Mhm.
really the same thing. Most people don't feel as good on thyroxine or
No.
Synthroid, or the synthetic versions, as they do just with their natural thyroid production. But
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is that that doesn't have to be the case. When people address this with by removing all of these lectins, by removing all of these exterior exposures that are attacking your thyroid, and then your body attacks the attacker, which is exactly what it's supposed to do.
Yeah,
All of a
exactly.
sudden, the damage stops, even though the antibodies can stay elevated for years, just as you'd see in celiac. The damage stops, and the
Yeah.
thyroid can actually start heal, which can take a while. It takes a year, 2 years before their thyroid recovers to the point that they can come off medications. And some have damaged their thyroid to such an extent that they can't completely come off medications, at least not so far, but
Mm.
they improve and they stop the damage and they stop getting worse. And almost everybody's able to reduce their thyroid medication and improve their health in other ways too.
Yeah, 100%. I have seen this working with women. They lower their antibodies, they reduce their meds, they get better and better and better. As you said, if you don't have a thyroid, as far as today, we cannot bring back an organ that has been broken down. But you mentioned the celiac patients and how they go into remission when they remove glutens. So that's all grains because they have similar proteins. I think that's a great example of seeing how dietary changes really makes a difference with autoimmunity.
Mhm.
And I don't understand, if we know that about celiac, why don't we apply that and try it on other autoimmune diseases? Because we
Mhm.
know that this puts them into remission. So why not
Yeah.
do more studies about that and try it out for
Mhm.
other autoimmune diseases? Because as you say, their approach right now is lifetime of meds, but a lot of women don't feel optimal on meds. It helps them survive, but not thrive. And for my mother, I've seen this, so I know how it goes. And a lot of the time, they have a lot of inflammation in the body also because they're exposed to something that they do not tolerate or that they are sensitive to, which could be lectins or grains, especially. I have seen that 80% get rid of a lot of symptoms just by removing grains and
Mm.
these plant toxins like lectins. So, like beans and legumes and all of these types of foods, the nightshades
Mhm.
that we also know if you go on an AIP diet, you remove high lectin foods.
Yeah, it's a very good point that if you remove certain things like these high lectin foods and people are getting better, and you should follow that forward, start pulling at that string and say, okay, well, what else can we affect?
Yeah.
And if celiac, which is an autoimmune condition, is a gluten mediated autoimmune condition, are there other autoimmune conditions that are mediated by some other sort of factor?
Yeah.
Dr. Fried thought so. He called out specific lectins from specific plants for specific autoimmune conditions back in
Mm,
1991. And then a follow-up paper. Why would we not just look at that? Why would we not sort of explore that? The problem is twofold. One, inside the box thinking, we already have an answer. We don't need to look anywhere else, right? It's good
yeah.
enough treatment. You just put them on medication. It's not that big of a deal. It is though. Hashimoto's can be very difficult, even with medication, as you said. It doesn't work the same way in your body. And what about all the other autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis? People die from multiple sclerosis, and there's so many other autoimmune conditions as well that are very debilitating and potentially life threatening. So there is no such thing as good enough in these sorts of things. And if you're
Mm-mm.
not trying to do everything you can for your patient, you are not doing good enough. The other problem is financial, because these sorts of illnesses are big business. Thyroid, we're talking millions to billions of dollars. So, and then the other autoimmune conditions are really big business. So the number one and number two grossing drugs last year were autoimmune drugs. And the first one was, it was like $24.5 billion in
Mm.
gross sales around the world. And then number two was at $6.5 billion. That was Humira, which is, again, another autoimmune drug. But combined, there was $30 billion in sales for number
Yeah.
one and number two.
Wow.
But it makes big money. So this is
Yeah.
big money. It's not just Hashimoto's, it's all the autoimmune conditions. And if we recognize and accept that all, or at least most autoimmune conditions are dietary related, that are some sort of external trigger like lectins, but it could be other things as well. Glyphosate is very strongly associated with autoimmunity. But if we accept that and we impart that on the rest of the world, hey, we're looking at the wrong things. Let's look at these external exposures and try to remove those.
Mm.
That's going to remove tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue for these companies. So at the very least, they're not going to be the ones that say, by the way, you don't need these medications that we sell, just stop eating plants. It may not even be legal for them to say that, because they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. And
Mm.
so if they actually say, this is something that you can do, you might get fired for that.
Yeah.
So it's, you have to just accept that that's the system. And they're
Mm.
not going to tell us about a cure, even if they have it,
Yeah.
because that's not their business model. And so we just have to do it. We just have to look for cures. We just have to look for the underlying root cause. And the underlying root cause of Crohn's is not a Humira deficiency. It's just not, right?
Exactly. You touch on a very important point, because I do believe that money is power. And
Mm.
of course, these companies, they want to make as much money as possible because they are businesses. And if they can
Yeah.
get one on meds for the rest of their life, imagine that revenue. Like it's billions of dollars. And actually, the system is built in such a way that you can make money out of sick people, which of course will give them an interest to get more people sick, because that's better for their business. But
Mhm.
if the system where you get more paid, the more people you get healthy, then the world would look totally different. But that's not how it was built. It was built
Mm-mm.
sick care, I like to say, more than health care. Like,
Yeah.
but you touched on the gut and how it's connected to autoimmune diseases, and that it's basically these plant toxins that get attached to the cells. And in the gut, they have seen that when you eat things like gluten, it actually clumps together, and the villi in the stomach, it kinds of
Mhm.
flattens, and that makes you not being able to absorb the nutrition from the food. But of course, the immune system are gonna want to remove that,
Mhm.
and it could hurt you in the process. But it was never meant to hurt you. It was actually meant to help you, because if you cannot take up nutrients from the food, then you will die. And you know this because you have studied this. And if you know anything about the immune system, you know it's on your side, and it
Yeah.
tries to help you in every way it can. And if something is hurting the body, it will remove it. If
Yeah.
you die, it dies. So
Mhm.
it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah. When your immune cells are maturing, they're exposed to every single antigen that your body's capable of making. So, genetically and functionally, phenotypically, these cells are not capable of attacking your body. So the really poor attempt at explaining this away taught now is something called molecular mimicry, where you have some sort of invader, some sort of infection, and your body attacks that, makes antibodies towards that. They make it by just repeatedly making random antibodies in just random order, so that they're constantly just trying to find something that could be different, could be hiding itself, that our body's never been exposed to. And all of a
Or
sudden, one of them just sticks. So the thought is that it sticks to these viruses or whatever invader it is. And then that virus or that pathogen was similar enough to something that we make that there's this cross reaction, and then our body's
Exactly.
now sensitized to that.
Mhm.
That doesn't make any sense because, again, that's how our body is making these antibodies, is by just random production. And
Mhm.
so they randomly are not going to make something that attacks a virus that will also attack you, because it doesn't need that intermediary if that's the case. If it could make something that attacks a pathogen that could cross react with your
Yeah.
body, it could make something that would just react to your body in the first place. It doesn't need that intermediary. So it doesn't
Mm.
make sense.
Mhm.
And again, your body can't make antibodies that
That's it.
attack yourself. Therefore, it wouldn't make an antibody that would attack the virus in the same way that it would attack yourself. So it would have to make it in a different way. A good example of this is our blood types. So we have, A, B, O, rhesus positive, negative in our blood types, right? You get exposed to these different sorts of antigens in your food. And so even if you've never had a blood transfusion or anything like that, you have antibodies to all the other blood types,
Yes.
right? So if you're you know um, type A,
Mm.
you're going to have, just exposed through your food and other sort of pathogens, you'll actually come across those the antigens for B and things like that, right? And so you will already have antibodies towards that. So it's not
Yeah.
like your first blood transfusion, you can take any blood. No, you'll react the first time,
Yeah.
right? Because you already have antibodies towards B if you're type A.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so why is that? Well, you have these other antigens that come in and your
Mm.
body gets sensitized to that. Okay, so that means that you're getting antigens in for type A as well, and other
Yeah.
things that are close to type A, but you don't make antibodies towards them that can cross react with A because you're
Mhm.
A. Your body's not capable of making antibodies that attack A because
Mhm.
it's already been tested against those, and your body just says, no, 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 we're not going to do that. So
Yeah.
again, the body's not capable of doing this. And
Yeah.
I went back to my old textbooks and I was like, yeah, no, that's what it said. It hasn't changed. So it doesn't hold up.
Yeah.
And the simple fact is that once you change someone's diet and the
Mm.
antibodies stay elevated, just like in celiac,
Yeah.
but the damage stops,
Mm.
obviously this is not an autoimmune condition. Those antibodies are still there. Your body's still there, but
Yeah.
there's no damage happening. So that
Exactly.
means there's
Yeah.
something else going on that is precipitating this damage.
Mhm.
And that's behooves us to look at that very seriously
Yeah.
and start treating this very differently. It's just sort of paradigm shift, but it's a necessary one.
Yes, 100%. And as you said, like since your last exposure, it can go up to like 1 or 2 years, and you
Mhm.
might still have antibodies ongoing
Yeah.
for that. And so, like, if you know that you're sensitive to gluten, it could be a good idea to not include
Right.
it even in small amounts, because that might trigger the antibodies again. You don't
Mhm.
want to do that, obviously. But I think you explained it so good. Like, the main reason why we have an immune system is to protect us against something that comes from the outside to the inside that might hurt us, not from the
Mhm.
inside and the inside. So it doesn't make sense that it would be something on the inside that would trigger your body to attack itself.
Mhm. Yeah. And also, if our body was capable of attacking itself, it wouldn't wait until you're 35
Yeah.
to all of a sudden start attacking itself. It would
No,
do that as soon as your immune system is online. You would start seeing very, very serious damage happening to your body.
exactly.
And it doesn't act like an infection either. If we accept the idea that someone with Hashimoto's, their body is sensitized to their thyroid, like it's an abscess in your neck. When was the last time it took you 35 years to clear an infection? But I mean, people do live with Hashimoto's and other autoimmune issues for
Yeah.
decades.
Yeah.
And the thing is that when your body thinks that there's an infection or there
Yeah.
is an infection, there's a full court press, massive ramp up in your immune cells and in your antibodies, and it just goes up, 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 up. It doesn't actually come down unless you suppress your immune system. But we don't see that in autoimmune conditions. We see antibodies going up and they're going down, they're going up and going down, and all that sort of stuff. Well, why would it do that
No.
for your thyroid when it doesn't do that for any other infection
Mm.
in your body that you ever have? Because the thing is that your body is going to keep attacking until either that's dead or you're dead, because those are the stakes. Because
Yeah.
if your body doesn't contain that infection and get rid of it, it will
Mhm.
become disseminated disease. It'll go throughout your entire body. You'll get multi-organ failure and you'll die. So it's not going to just take 50 years to
Yeah.
keep this at bay. The vast majority of these things, your body has to wipe these things out. And that's the
Yeah.
other thing too. People were treating tuberculosis in the 1800s, which was a major killer, with a carnivore diet because people's immune systems were actually getting better. When you eat carbohydrates, it can actually shut down your immune system. We have a study, I think it was 1974, that actually showed when you have 100 grams of carbohydrates from basically any source, especially from sugars, even fruit juice or fruit, that actually shuts down your neutrophils, which are a major part of your cellular defense,
Yeah.
cancer defense, tissue healing, things like that. And it can actually shut down your immune system and action of your neutrophils for up to 5 hours after you have carbohydrates. And so if you're eating carbohydrates 3 times a day and God forbid 3 snacks in between, you have completely not very dysfunctional neutrophils throughout the entirety of the day, maybe a couple hours while you're sleeping and you're
Mm.
not actually eating, that you actually have a functional immune system. But
Yeah.
also, when you eat carbohydrates, it changes your oral biome and the bacteria in your mouth. It breeds for some bacteria that can damage your teeth, which is actually another reason we know that carbohydrates aren't meant for us, because no animal eating their natural diet rots their teeth from that natural diet, because if you lose
Yeah.
your teeth, you lose the ability to eat and you die. So if we're eating something that rots our teeth, by definition, that's not something we're supposed to eat. And your bacteria in your mouth can cause gum disease. Again, that's
Mm.
not something that we would see normally if an animal is eating its natural diet. But that could be caused by something called Porphyromonas gingivalis, which is a bacteria, causes gingivitis. But every time you brush your teeth or eat food or something like that, some of that bacteria gets into your bloodstream and it gets into your body, damages your arteries, it gets into your brain. 96% of people that died with Alzheimer's in one study anyway found that they had Porphyromonas gingivalis in the brain, and that 89% of people with brain tumors called glioblastoma had Porphyromonas in the tumors as well. But it's also known to shut down your immune system even further. And so there's a lot of different reasons, but you're eating the wrong thing and your body cannot function properly. And
Mhm.
so it's not surprising that people were treating things like tuberculosis in the 1800s with a Salisbury steak, which was just meat, just beef. And that's what Dr. Salisbury was actually treating people with tuberculosis with that. So, the body is not treating your thyroid like an infection, because your body wouldn't just ramp up attack and then bring it down and ramp it up and then bring it down and spend, years and decades fighting this, because you'd be dead. You would
Yes.
be dead if that
Yes.
if that were the case. These are patterns that we just don't see. We have like
Mhm.
relapsing, remitting. Like, no. There's, I mean, if you have relapsing, remitting immune response to a pneumonia, I mean, you're dead that week. It's not going to happen. So, why would you think that your body's just going to be like, just take a break? It's a holiday. I'm just gonna go on vacation. It's not going to do that, or you're dead. And genetically, we wouldn't see that wouldn't survive in the genome, because those
Yeah.
people would be just dead in infancy and they would
Mhm.
never have made it out of that. And also, again, these diseases are becoming far more prevalent. They are
Yeah.
several times more prevalent than they were even 40 years ago. The argument is we're getting better at diagnostics. First of all, no, we're not. Second
Mm.
of all, it doesn't really take a good diagnostician to recognize when someone has bloody diarrhea 20 times a day and they're in excruciating pain,
Oh
right?
my
It's just like,
God.
I wonder what that, no, it seems normal to me. Like, no, that's not, that's ridiculous. We've diagnosed these things for sometimes hundreds of years. Diabetes goes back 2,200 years. You really think that we're just figuring out diabetes? No, we've known about diabetes for a long time. The treatment for diabetes for about 300 years, and I'm quoting this from Sir William Osler's textbook in 1910, 10 years before insulin was
Mm.
discovered. He was the professor of medicine from Johns Hopkins University, top medical university in the world. He was the preeminent physician of his era. He was like the most well-renowned. He was knighted for his work in medical education and writing this textbook. This was the medical textbook. And there's a chapter on diabetes that says we followed the advice of Sydenham, who was a famous doctor from the 1600s. And this is how they treated it ever since. And this is the gold standard treatment at Johns Hopkins University, was have them eat easy to digest foods such as veal and mutton, so meat, avoid all fruit and garden stuff, so all fruits and vegetables, and
Gardens.
Garden stuff, yeah, 1600s, right? So this is how they spoke back then, and we think we're so sophisticated now. All you have to do is read basic literature or writings from 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago. They were much more sophisticated than we are now, and much better educated in a lot of ways. We know more now, but they knew it better. We have a broader knowledge base, but the people living today don't have a good depth of knowledge and understanding. They did back then. They
Yeah.
all had classical educations. They read ancient Greek and Latin, and they really understood these things in ways that we just don't anymore. And then they said, keep carbohydrates to a minimum. Try to keep that down to zero. So that's a carnivore diet. You're just eating meat, and that was the only thing that was keeping diabetics alive, type 1 and type 2s. We've known about these diseases for a very long time. It's just that we are now rediscovering what we've known for hundreds of years about how to treat these things.
Yeah.
And, when insulin came in, that became the treatment for diabetes. And then it was like, we can sell this. And if people eat more carbs, they need more insulin. So all of a sudden it became, well, you should eat more carbohydrates. Now, yes. That's what kept people alive before and cured it. And they didn't need the insulin. However, it's better if they have a whole bunch of carbs now. And you have to wonder what motivated that. There definitely was a conflict of interest there, because they definitely would make money based on that. Exactly. And now, insulin was never on patent. The people that discovered insulin, they sold the patent to the public for $1, because this was back when doctors actually tried to cure diseases. And they said, this is too important. We can't have people just making money on this. And it was really sad that they did that, because then the drug companies that started making insulin, they could charge whatever the hell they wanted, and anybody could do it, but there weren't enough of them to compete to keep the prices down. If they had kept the patent, they could have just sold it for a very low, fair price and made sure and controlled the price in the favor of keeping this affordable for everybody. But they didn't, unfortunately.
Yeah. I don't know if it was you who said this, but the insulin that they are giving to the type 1 diabetes
Mhm.
patients is not the same as the body creates itself.
Correct. And that shows you why we're not supposed to eat carbohydrates either, because when we eat carbohydrates, we get a jump in our blood sugar, raises our insulin, but then our blood sugar crashes. And this is in healthy individuals, not just diabetics.
Yeah.
We actually get a crash. It's called reactive hypoglycemia. So our blood sugar actually goes too low when we eat carbohydrates, because our insulin stays up longer than our carbohydrate spike. And so we had to reinvent insulin. This also keeps it on patent, conveniently enough. And so it gives a short spike. So your blood sugar goes up, this fast acting insulin, and then that comes down to a more baseline. So you're not getting those drops in blood sugar. But as people with type 1 diabetes or insulin dependent type 2 diabetes, they're coming around to understanding what we knew since Sydenham in the 1600s, that if you just feed people just meat and cut out carbs and fruits and garden stuff, that diabetes largely goes away and your demand for insulin certainly goes down. And they found that insulin that they're using is now not working properly. So now they're just eating meat, fat and protein, and they're taking the fast acting insulin like Act Rapid or Nova Rapid. And now their blood sugar comes down, but then it comes back up, and they take another one, it goes down again, but then it comes back up. So it's like, okay, so now they're going back to like a medium acting insulin, or just going back to our old insulin, which is called R insulin, letter R insulin. And that actually much more perfectly matches the protein curve, the demand for insulin that protein gives you. So that's just perfectly matching that, which really suggests that the insulin that we make naturally is designed for protein, not carbohydrates.
Yeah.
But again, there's no profit model
No.
based on just stop eating certain things and this disease goes away.
Exactly. But a big thing also is that many kids nowadays are born with type 1 diabetes and these autoimmune diseases. And I think you touched a little bit about that as well in the Rethinking Autoimmunity lecture. You said that basically these plant chemicals, these lectins, they can go through the placenta.
Yeah, they can.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
that will trigger autoimmunity in the kid. They will develop antibodies already from the get-go.
Yeah, they can. And so those lectins can get in the body, and certain antibodies that can cross the placenta and others can't. But you can certainly see that. And one of these examples that people give is like, this is autoimmune because you can transplant plasma that has antibodies for like Graves' disease, which is experiments that they did, and they transfer that from one to the other. But when you transplant the plasma, you're not just transplanting the antibodies, you're transplanting everything that's in the plasma. So you could very well transplant those lectins and other sort of compounds as well. And so, yes, you're going to get a reaction from the antibodies, but you're not isolating those antibodies necessarily. And that kid or whatever you've transplanted it to, depending on their diet, could already have the precursors there. And then all of a sudden, those antibodies have something to trigger off of.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things here that can also explain the same things that we're seeing, and in many ways better explain them. Because again, it's very simple. If you stop eating certain things, these antibodies stop attacking your body. And over time, those antibodies do come down. If they are very strict on a carnivore diet, especially just beef, lamb, and water, because the ruminant digestion of those animals break down and filter out more of these lectins, plant toxins, and even glyphosate, so they don't get into the meat at all. Their autoimmune condition slows down to a stop or even completely halts, and then the body starts reversing that and starts improving. And you can track those antibodies, and they do start coming down. But your body's not going to stop making antibodies entirely. It's going to keep some sort of vigil just in case that insult comes back again. So it can take, again, years, just like in celiac, for those antibodies to come down to a very low level. But that is what I see. And then when someone just says, I'm going on a vacation and going to Italy and just going to enjoy myself, and they come back and their antibodies shoot up and they don't feel good anymore, it's the same thing. So antibodies are slowly coming down, then they go off plan and bam, they shoot right back up. And then slowly coming down, and bam, shoot up again.
Yeah.
How can that be explained if the body's just attacking itself? It's just sensitized to your thyroid like it's an infection.
Yeah.
Food should not affect that.
Yeah.
Food should not have anything to do with that, and yet it does. And so we need to re-examine that, because even if there's some sort of autoimmune component, the body is really attacking itself, food still affects it. And removing certain foods still improves those autoimmune conditions. So either way, you stop eating these foods, and that can improve the situation.
Yeah, and why food has such big impact on the body is because a lot of our immune system is in the stomach. We have like 70% of our immune system in the gut. So that's a big reason to why when you change your diet, that also calms the immune system, because it lives there to a big amount. But it's also interesting because that would explain why some people are kind of born with autoimmune diseases, because they say it's genetic, but it's not genetic. Perhaps some of those plant toxins crossed into the placenta, and that set them up for an overreactive immune system, or a correctly active immune system, I would say, rather. But but also there are studies where they take identical twins. One gets an autoimmune disease, the other does not. And if it was purely genetic, both would get an autoimmune disease, but that's not what we're seeing. And as you said, like, it wouldn't go up and down in your symptoms. It would just get worse and worse and worse and worse. But people who changes their lifestyle go into remission. And a lot of the times, if you do not treat the autoimmune issue, it can keep on going. So you get more autoimmune diseases in time. So it can start as Hashimoto's, but then you might get 5 other autoimmune diseases in a lifetime, and it's not uncommon. So calming down the immune system, getting rid of those antibodies is crucial if you want to have a good life, and also reduce inflammation. And if you want to not age as fast, because inflammaging is called inflammaging for a reason. You age so much faster, and you do not, you're not able to have the same performance. And you're an athlete yourself, so you have seen how it changes your performance as well. But some people say that yes, but it depends on where you live in the world if you should eat only meat or not. I'm from Scandinavia. I'm even related to like the Swedish Indians, which are called the Sami.
The
I
Sami.
don't know if you've heard. They have not even grown food for any years, because you cannot grow food in the north. And so they lived out of whatever they could hunt, and also some berries. And that was pretty much it. And so I think that, of course, the less adapted you are, the faster it might trigger you. Like for me, it started out so young, and maybe it's because I have those genes. Haven't even had 100 years to adapt to this new lifestyle.
Yeah.
They didn't start eating anything other than that until the Industrial Revolution.
Mhm.
Maybe even later than that, because they're self-sufficient. They
Mhm.
can live off the land. But what would you answer to that? Like, is there a difference between cultures that has been growing their own foods for hundreds of years compared to people who has been living more like the Inuits or the Sami people?
Yeah, we do see in these native populations that when going on a Western diet, a more plant-based diet, and the Western diet is definitely a plant-based diet. People think, oh, this Western meat-based diet. No, it's not. Over 70% of the calories consumed on a Western diet are from plants and mostly carbohydrates.
Mm,
And so the definition of a hyper carnivore is any animal that eats over 70% calories from meat. And since the Western diet is over 70% calories from plants, that is a hyper vegetarian diet, not even vegetarian, but hyper vegetarian. And so, you can't blame meat on that. These native populations, they haven't been exposed to these sorts of plant toxins and environmental toxins and so on that we've been exposed to, or other people have been exposed to for
yeah,
longer. Obviously, in the modern era, we have all these fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides, herbicides, all these other sorts of things that we're adding. That's new to everybody, and no
yeah,
one's going to be adapted to that. But just the plant toxins are something that we've gotten some adaptation to over the last 10,000 years. And a bit before that, sort of maybe certain populations that couldn't get all the meat that they wanted to because, the megafauna were dying out and then they went extinct. And so they had to sort of find other sort of things to fill in the gaps. And
mm,
so you started that sort of process of coming up with a bit more defenses. But then people like the Sami or the Native Americans in North America, or very North America, the Inuit, or the Maasai, they just did not have this exposure
mm,
up until 150 years ago. Australian Aboriginals, same thing. When they're on a Western diet, they have much higher proportions of these so-called chronic diseases. If it's just supposed to be oh, you're just aging, and well, that's just what you get, then why are we seeing it more prevalent in those groups? And why are we only seeing it when they switch their diet? Because that's
mm,
in the anthropology textbooks right now. I actually had just a comment yesterday on, this person was a professor of anthropology, and his whole career was about, the ways that native populations ate and cooked and prepared food and the different sorts of health effects that this had. And he
mm,
said that he's been waiting for years for doctors to catch up to the anthropology literature, right? I've read different papers in anthropology, in the current anthropology journals, that say very clearly native populations, the health issues that they get are not the same as what we face in the Western cultures. It's
mm,
not the chronic diseases, the diabetes, the cancer, the heart disease, the autoimmunity, etc. They deal with infectious disease, injuries, tigers, war, famines, and infant mortality rates, and things that we had more to contend with 1800s and before. We still
yeah,
had chronic disease, but this was more of the issue. And back then, there was called Western diseases and then non-Western diseases, and the native populations did not get Western diseases. Now,
yeah,
basically, that 90% of the issues that we treat are these so-called Western diseases.
yes,
And then the argument is, well, these native populations didn't live as long; they only lived in their 30s. That's just a bald-faced lie. I mean, you can even just
yeah,
Google 1800s. There were pictures of Native Americans and Australian
mm,
Aboriginals. And they had son who's just ripped and shredded, six-pack. The
yeah,
father, same thing, just shredded. Grandfather and the great-grandfather had 4 generations of men, and they were standing right there. What are you talking about? They die in their 30s. You have 4 generations all standing
right,
right there, all looking just shredded and jacked.
yeah,
And so obviously they're not dying in their 30s. And in fact, this is considering infant mortality rates. So if 3 out of 5 died in infancy, obviously that brings the average down. So if the average life expectancy from birth is 38, as it was in America in 1850,
mm,
and 3 people are dying before the age of 1, those other 2 had to live a long ass time. So to bring up that average up to 38, because the thing is, we actually kept statistics more intelligently than people are interpreting them now. In
yeah,
1850, up and through to modern era, we have these statistics, and we looked at statistics of average life expectancy from birth is what it is. But then because they understood about infant mortality and
Mm.
still do when except the people that are using this against, to prove a point,
Yeah.
they found so average life expectancy from birth, then average life expectancy from 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, all the way up to 80 years old in 1850. So if people were just dying in their 30s, why are you keeping statistics on how long people live if they live to 80, if they're only
Yeah.
living to 30, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of a dumb thing to do. But the thing is that average life expectancy from birth was 38, but then
Mm.
average life expectancy from 10 was 60.
Mm.
Right? Huge jump, right? Because you're cutting out all those different causes of infant mortality. Average
Yeah.
life expectancy from 20 was like 67, right? And
Mm.
so on. It just goes up from there. And so as you get into, middle-aged adulthood, the average life expectancy was basically about the same as it is now. The increase in life expectancy comes from potable water and reducing causes of infant mortality. Those are the two major drivers of the average life expectancy coming up. But average life expectancy from adulthood is pretty damn similar to what it is now. Same in those native populations. And again, this is in the anthropology textbooks, in their literature as well. There's recent studies showing this with populations down the Amazon from a professor from Arizona State University. But it ain't showing these guys were living into their 70s, 80s, 90s. And they weren't dying of chronic diseases. They weren't getting diabetes and cancer.
Yeah.
They were dying from other things.
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
if they switched over to a Western diet, then they got these problems because they said these are all the problems that they get in their natural habitat. And then when
Mm.
they switch to a Western diet and a Western culture, then the problems that they face shift over to the diseases of civilization. The hell is a disease of civilization? It's diabetes, it's cancer, it's autoimmunity, it's these chronic diseases. And
Yes.
in anthropology, those are termed diseases of civilization
Wow.
because they only happen in these populations. Right. So what does that mean? That means something in our environment, in the modern culture, in the modern civilized culture, is causing these problems and diseases. These are not genetic. It's not just we're living longer. It's that something in our environment, I would argue it's predominantly the food, but it's other things as well,
Yes.
are causing the disease.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, what are the other factors except for diet that's making us sicker than ever?
Well, it's just things we're being exposed to that we're not designed for. You're in 300,000-year-old genetic bodies. And we're
Yes.
in this modern era with all these things that we have never been exposed to ever in
Yeah.
history. And we just don't know how that
Mm-hmm.
affects us.
Yes.
Glyphosate, these sorts of things, those are
Yeah.
strongly associated with all of these. Yeah, with all of these autoimmune issues and other sort of cancers.
Fluoride was
Yeah.
traditionally used as an antithyroid to lower
No.
thyroid function.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so all these sorts of things. So we're getting exposed to things we really shouldn't, and it's
Mhm.
damaging us. And so that's sort of the overarching theory that I have is sort of this toxicity and malnutrition, getting a toxic exposures largely from an inappropriate diet, but from other things as well, but also
Yeah.
from malnutrition because we're replacing the meat predominant
Mm.
nutrients with these plant-based nutrients that we think, oh no, it's fine as long as you get enough calories. That's the only thing. No, it's not.
Yeah.
That's like the least of it. We need
So,
nutrients. Our body doesn't know what the hell a calorie is. Who knows what nutrients are?
exactly. We need certain
Mhm.
nutrients to be healthy for the body to be able to repair itself, to protect you from diseases, the foundation, because without it, it cannot
Mhm.
work properly, right? So,
Yeah, and that all comes from meat. I remember reading in college there was a paper that said, how did humans get enough nutrients to grow their brain? They must have eaten a lot of honey because it's very energy dense, a lot of
Mhm.
energy to build that brain. I was like, well, fat is more nutrient energy dense than
Yeah.
honey is. I mean, honey is just a bunch of sugar, so there's a lot of energy there, but fat is pure energy and it has over double the amount of energy per gram
Hmm.
that those have. So that's density. It's not just total, energy. It's energy density, and that's what they
Yeah.
were talking about. And they were sort of missing a big one there. And they said, okay, well, they would have to eat this plant and this thing, and have to eat this and this and this and this and this. And I
Yeah.
remember thinking, I can think of a single source food that has, by definition, all the nutrients that you need to grow your brain, which
Mm.
is a brain. And so you eat
Yeah.
another animal and you eat its brain, it's all the nutrients that you need to grow a brain are in that brain. And so the
Mhm.
animal's done all the hard work for you. You don't need to scavenge and find 50 different ingredients. I mean, how's that going to work?
Yeah.
How is this uneducated ape-like thing that, doesn't have a bunch of nutritionists, telling them on the internet what they need to eat and all these sorts of things? How are they just going to be out in the wild and understand that they need, 3 of those leaves, 6 of those, a couple of those tubers, piece of fish, and this and this and this and this and this? Well, it doesnn't know that. It just needs to eat.
Yeah. And another point is also that when you eat the meat, it's so highly bioavailable. So
Yeah.
you don't have to cook it a certain way. You will get all the nutrients in the easiest form that the body can absorb it, and in the best form also, because if we compare the nutrition iron from plant food, it will not
Mhm.
be heme iron like in meats. So it's not even the same types of nutrients that the body needs and prefers. And there's a whole process. If you want to get the iron out of spinach, you have to pair it with a lemon, and there's no way that our ancestors would go through all that trouble, especially since
Yeah.
we're the apex predators. We're on the top of the food chain. And looking at other apex predators, they eat other animals. So they are meat eaters as well. And so that would make sense for us also.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and it's also clear proof of what we're actually biologically designed to eat.
Mm.
Because if something is not bioavailable, it means that we don't have the enzymes to digest and break down and absorb those nutrients, which means we are not designed to eat that, right?
Exactly.
So
It is.
it's just so straightforward, right? And so if you eat meat and you can get more of the iron, more of the protein, and it's a perfect protein, it's the exact essential amino acids that you need in the
Mm.
exact proportion that you need them. And proportionality is really important as far as amino acids are concerned. It's not just getting the right amino acids, it's getting the right amino acids in the right combination, in the right proportions is
Yes.
very, very important. And
Yes.
so meat provides all of that. It has the most bioavailable nutrients, has the most bioavailable and proportionate amino acids in one source. It's a single source nutrition piece of food that you can get everything that you need in the proportion that you need it. And there isn't a single thing that does not come in meat that you need. There's not a single nutrient that we require from
Mm.
plants that does not come already packaged in meat.
Yeah.
And there are many nutrients that you have to have that
Mm.
you can only get from meat that you cannot get from plants. And again, we don't
Yes.
have the ability to extract niacin from corn, for example. We need niacin. Corn has niacin. We
Yeah.
cannot get it from
No.
corn. We have
Yeah.
to use chemicals, we have to use lye, we have to use heat
Mm.
and other sorts of chemistry to extract the niacin. But
Yes.
people actually died by the tens of thousands, if not by the hundreds of thousands in the early 1900s from something called pellagra, which is niacin deficiency. And that's
Mm.
because when corn started being, widely used across Europe and the Americas, they weren't breaking them, processing them in the traditional ways that the
Yes.
Mesoamericans did, which was something called nixtamalization, which is where the word tamales come from. And
Mm.
they would soak it in lye and they would cook it and smash it and do all these different sorts of things.
Mm.
And now we're just eating it, on its own and, maybe cooking it, steaming it, but that's it. And we weren't able to extract the nutrients we needed. And people were dying from niacin deficiency, which is ironic because corn is full of niacin,
I said,
right?
yeah.
But it's not available to us. And
Yes.
so that is proof positive
Yes.
that we are not designed to eat that because we do not have the natural biological processes that can
Mm.
extract those nutrients. Therefore, we are not designed
Yes.
to get our nutrients from there. We've had to use our technology
Yeah.
and our brain power and chemistry to extract those. And that's good in the sense that we can survive and we can figure
Mm.
out more nutrition sources, which helps in survival. But that is
Yes.
very clear that that's not our designed biologically appropriate diet.
Yeah. Or preferred. I like to take this example. Like if you were
Mm.
starving and you were handed a plate of meat, a
Mhm.
plate of salad, or a plate of fruit, what would you choose? I would choose
Yeah,
the meat every
every time.
yeah, every time.
Yeah.
And actually, when I was 13, I had some sort of virus that made me not being able to eat for an entire month. And after that, obviously, my muscles atrophied and my
Mm.
organs were starting to shut down and everything. But after that, I could decide the food at home. And so my mother said, she's picking the food. You don't have a say, the rest of you. And so for a whole month, I was saying, I want meat. I want meat. I want
Hmm.
meat. every single day. That just showed me how instinctual it is. The body knows what it needs, but I was at a starved state, right? That was my preferred source of energy. I wanted meat. And the rest were like, can we eat something else? I was like, no, we're eating.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that many women, especially out of 10, 8 who get autoimmune diseases are women. And I think a big contributor to this, it's due to that
Mm.
we lose blood every single month, but we do
Mm.
not replenish that iron loss. And iron also helps the immune system and it helps rebuild the blood in the body. But if you cannot even replenish what you have lost, then how can you thrive? It's
Yeah.
also such a marker when it comes to energy. And it has even shown that if you are critically low in iron, it can even increase antibodies itself just by that factor alone. And there are many discussions on why it's more common in women and things like that. But I think it's a big stress on the body. And also, when the body is under stress, you burn through nutrients faster. And
Mhm.
I can also imagine, because when we think about stress, we only think about or mostly we think about the psychological aspects of being stressed, but many does not take into account the inner stress inside of the body. If you're constantly exposed to things you are sensitive to, and especially things that hurts your body, that's going to burn through nutrients so much faster. And you need those nutrients to stay healthy. So it just gets like a vicious cycle
Mhm.
where you lose key nutrients, your body is so stressed, you're chronically inflamed and have high cortisol. And on top of that, you're also losing blood
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
iron.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense, and the thing is, you're putting yourself in a deficient state, and also, what are you replacing that with? You're eating less meat, you're eating these sorts of things, which is also means you're eating more plants and more lectins and more other things like that. Women are 3 times more likely to be vegetarian or vegan than men, and in America, according to one poll, 31% of women were saying that they were trying to eat less meat versus 15% of men were trying to eat less meat, things like that. So women are more likely to listen to that sort of dogma and that propaganda because the guidelines were such that they said, hey, you should eat more plant-based, you should eat less meat. Women are
Yeah.
more likely to go along with that. And statistically they have, and so they eat more plants, and men are more hedonistic. They just go, well, red meat's probably bad for me, but you know what? I don't care. I like it. It makes me feel good. But they're also more likely to smoke and drink and things like that. So you get cut both ways. But at least for that one, I think it was a benefit that people were like, yeah, whatever. But that's the thing too. You get into your 40s and you got a couple kids. You're like, hey, I need to be healthy and I need to be there for my children. And
Mhm.
then they start eating less meat and start eating more plants, and then they start getting the issues. Then they start getting the high blood pressure and the obesity, and they're like, oh, what's going on? And their doctors say that's from 30 years, 40 years of just eating a whole bunch of meat. It's all catching up to you. It's like, well, why was it that I never felt bad before this? And it's only now that I've stopped eating meat that I've started to have all these issues. I've never had high blood pressure, never had these problems. Now that I've stopped eating meat, I'm getting these problems, and you're blaming the meat. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But there certainly is a difference. I mean, women are much more likely to have autoimmune issues.
Mhm.
I mean, you could even say maybe there's some sort of X-linked gene, with this for some of these things, but I think it's much more likely to be our environment and just losing blood every month and having
Yes.
and being more nutritionally deficient, as
Yeah.
well as having more exposure to these antigens and lectins and things
Yes.
like that.
Yes. And also, we have a more sophisticated hormonal system also than men because we have more hormones to balance. And insulin is one of those hormones we need to
Mhm.
balance. You have too high insulin, you automatically have hormonal imbalance, right?
Yeah.
So we need to balance insulin, which is why carnivore is a great diet also. But
Mhm.
we also have other hormones that we need to balance. And hormones affects us so much, and especially when it comes to the emotional aspects as well. I think actually it's so unfair that women, they really try to listen to the studies and they try to be healthy, and that's what's causing them to be sick. And especially
Mhm.
since women are the ones who bleed, and need the nutrients for the kids to develop properly. So it's so unfortunate. And I think also they use that women are more emotionally, they use that against them.
Mm.
You're a bad person if you eat meat. They say
Yeah.
that it's not ethical, it's not
Mm.
right, and all these things. And then the women, they don't want to hurt the animals and stuff like that. But they are
Yeah.
probably the ones who needs the nutrition the most, both for fertility, to balance hormones, and also replenish themselves after they've had their period, for example.
If it were the case that you could get completely equal nutrition from eating plant-based versus animal-based, that might be a viable argument. I mean, then you have to go into the fact that you actually do kill more animals and destroy the environment and ecosystems to grow crops than you do animals. Animals are part of the environment, and you don't have to clear cut a forest to have cows there. You can just have the cows out on the land, and
Yeah.
they'll actually improve the land. Whereas with plants, you have to necessarily clear cut the land and destroy an entire ecosystem just to grow that one crop. And that argument is, well, but you've replaced plants with different plants. No, that's a monocrop. That's not an ecosystem. And any
Yeah.
animals that come in there to live in that crop and eat that crop, they shoot, they poison, they kill, they trap, and all that sort of stuff. So you have to kill over 25 times the number of sentient animals to just grow 1 pound of plant-based protein versus animal-based protein if you're like eating large animals like a cow. And then it's further than that because you're poisoning the environment. You're dumping billions of tons of glyphosate and insecticides and pesticides. You're killing multi-quadrillions of insects every single year. And that is 1 quadrillion of insects a year just in America. And that's the basis of the food chain. So now there are billions of animals that can never exist in the first place or didn't survive because they couldn't get enough food and they couldn't have kids.
Mm.
And you poison those bugs and insects, and you're poisoning the birds that eat them. We're poisoning 700 million birds a year just in America. 70
Yeah.
million of those are dying every
Mhm.
year. It's poisoning the waterways, getting in the groundwater, getting the oceans, rivers, lakes. Apart from all that ecological disaster, catastrophe, and wanton death that doesn't even go and feed anything, it's just
Yeah.
dead and rotting.
Yeah.
If you could get adequate nutrition, equal nutrition, you could maybe make that argument that it's more ethical to eat
Mm.
plant-based, even though you're actually causing more harm.
Mm.
The problem is it's not. It's
Yeah.
not equal nutrition.
It's not even
So
that.
yeah, you're not, and so there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies. There are even
Mm.
more case reports of vegetarians and vegan parents whose children are getting very sick or even dying
Yeah.
because they're not getting adequate nutrition. I mean, in Italy, they
Mm.
tried to pass a law and make it illegal to feed your kid a vegan diet in 2016. It didn't pass, but they tried doing it because they had 4 kids die in a year. Well, that made the news anyway. I'm sure there's a lot more of
Mm.
vegan parents whose kids died of malnutrition.
Oh.
Some of these people were breastfeeding, and so the breast milk was so deficient in nutrients, the kids were dying
Oh.
and or having very severe neurodevelopmental issues where their brains look like an 80-year-old Alzheimer's patient at 6
Ah.
months,
Oh.
and there are hundreds of those case reports in the literature. And
It's
the
so.
vast majority of those kids were
Mm.
from mothers who were vegetarian or
Yeah.
vegan. And some of them had pernicious anemia, so they weren't able to absorb B12 properly. But that was like less than 20%
Mm.
of these case reports. That was in an analysis that sort of looked at all this sort of stuff. So
Mm.
you have to sort of ask yourself, well, it's not ethical to eat animals. Well, aside from the fact that you kill more animals growing crops than you do eating meat, or it's not ethical to poison your kids. It's
Yeah.
not ethical to not provide the absolute best nutrition for that child's development. It is not ethical to say, well, this is good enough. Well, maybe they're not as tall as they would be. Maybe they're not as smart as they would be. Maybe
Yeah.
they're not the person that they would have been genetically, but it's good
Mm.
enough. Good enough is not ethical, not when it
No.
comes to your kids. And when you shoot for good enough, you're never going to make it. The best, you might hit good enough, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so that's not ethical. When you're seeing people in old folks' homes who are losing their mind, they're losing their faculties. These are people that could have another 20, 30 years of being healthy, productive, active, just adults that just get to enjoy their life. They've worked hard their whole life, and now they get to enjoy their retirement. And their brains are decaying. They're not getting enough B12. They're not getting enough protein. They're not getting enough animal fats for their
Yeah.
brain to function properly.
Mm.
And so their brain is dying and
Mm.
atrophying We know that if your B12 is actually well within the normal range, what we consider normal range of B12, people's brains are atrophying and shrinking. The reason we call it a normal range is because it's just an average. So the ranges that we use now are just averages, and the average person is B12 deficient. And so now in that normal range, we're hiding this deficiency because it's just an average. It's an average of deficient people.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, yeah, we know that in B12, in well within the normal ranges, you're losing 0.5% to 1% of your brain volume per year, as per a study published out of Oxford University in 2008 that actually showed this. In elderly adults, they were actually losing 0.5% to 1% per year, and these were
Yeah.
well within the normal ranges. And the lower the B12, there's a direct relationship. The lower the B12, the faster they were losing their brain. And
Yeah.
so that's not ethical. It's not ethical to rob these people of the last 30, 40 years of their life and their health and their faculties so that they can't even think and they can't remember their kids. And they
Yeah.
have to sit in a box and have their family spend $15,000 a month to keep their parents in this room where they can't even function. They're just sort of watching TV and drooling. And
Yep.
that's sort of a not nice way of putting it, but that is the reality.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's
the
not a
reality.
nice way to live. And yet now we're seeing people like a friend of mine, Hal Cranmer, and he has elderly care facilities with terminal Alzheimer's and Parkinson's patients and dementia patients who he's putting them on ketogenic carnivore diets. And all of a sudden these people are improving and some of them are going home, you
Yeah.
know? It's not ethical to impose that on other people. It's not ethical to do that to your parents. It's not ethical to do that to your children. You want to do that to yourself, that's your business. It is not
Exactly.
ethical to do that to other people. And
Yeah.
I think the ethical argument is much more nuanced and much more clear when you actually look at the entire picture because it's
Yeah.
not just, oh, I don't want to eat animal that feels yucky. Okay, well, it does feel yucky. I don't like it. I don't like the fact that an animal has to die so that
Yeah.
I can get proper nutrition. But that is the reality.
Yeah.
All animals are heterotrophs. Something has to die for us to live. And you know what? It's no picnic for the plants to die either. They're sentient. That's
Yeah.
something that botanists are understanding now, that plants might be more sentient than we are.
Yeah.
You know, they can see us, they can see that, they can recognize what color shirt we're wearing. If you go into like a
Yeah.
botanical garden, things like that, or a garden, they can measure the ultrasonic waves and little clicks and pops, and they actually speak to each other and they express chemical signals that they communicate as well. And they actually communicate through their root system. They can pass nutrients and water between root systems. So you have an entire forest is actually a community where they have a sentinel tree, which is like the leader, and it actually controls where resources go and say, hey, these guys over here 6 miles away, they're in a bit of a drought and they need some magnesium. Let's pull that over here from this other place. So they're like supercomputers. They can understand, hey, where these things need to go. And so they can keep the entire population alive. They can keep that entire ecosystem alive. So they're very sophisticated. When you have people come through there and start cutting it down and breaking branches and twigs and things like that, all of a sudden this clicks and pops start going crazy, start warning each other like, hey, we're being attacked, we're being damaged. Then they leave, everything calms down. Other people come in and out. No problem, no problem, no problem. Days later, they brought back in that guy who trashed the place. Instantly, boom, warning sign, like that asshole's back again. Watch out. You know, so that's very sophisticated. You know, these things can see us. They can recognize individuals. They can recognize individual humans, days
Wow.
distant, right? And, you know, so I mean, there are some botanists that are saying that plants display characteristics that could be defined as personhood, right?
Wow.
So you're not getting away from the ethical argument by just eating plants. In fact, you could argue that you're causing more strife, more damage, more harm to sentient creatures by
Yeah.
eating the plants than you're eating just one big cow or buffalo once every 2 years.
Yes, yes. And you were talking about how like nature is an ecosystem and
Hmm.
how everything is needed for it to work properly. And it's the same in the body. And that's also the wrong view that we have in the allopathic system, that every organ is a separate, and we don't understand the complexity behind the immune system and how it truly cooperates with every single part of the body. Everything is an ecosystem. And they say that, if you have an aquarium and the fish are getting sick, you're not giving the fish medicine, you're cleaning the aquarium. And that's what
Hmm.
we need to do inside our bodies as well. But I think you're absolutely right with the ethic and moral perspective of this, because I did a podcast with another lady, and we talked about breast milk and how we transfer as women parts of our immune system to the baby, and how it's so important that we breastfeed because of that reason, and a bunch of other reasons as well of nutrition. It's the best
Yeah.
that you can give to kids. But we were looking up other alternatives for people who could not breastfeed. And every single formula that we could find
Hmm.
contained um, seed oils.
Yeah. By law.
Yeah, because they had to fill the requirement for omega 6.
Mhm.
The
Which is
guidelines were saying was
yeah. Well, there's plenty of omega-6s in animal fats, and there's a far higher proportion of omega-6 to omega-3s in plant fats, and it's the wrong kind of omega-6s and omega-3s as well. We don't need linoleic acid. We need arachidonic acid. We don't want linoleic acid, in fact,
yeah.
and that's the predominant omega-6 that's in plants, and you're getting far more of those omega-6s in the seed oils than you actually would want,
Mm,
and you're getting none of the omega-3s that we need. The plant version of omega-6 is alpha linoleic acid, ALA. We don't need alpha linoleic acid, not for our brains anyway. We do get you get some of it from meat anyway, but we need DHA and EPA, and there's less than a 1% conversion of ALA into DHA or EPA. And in fact, other studies have shown that the more ALA you get, actually you get less DHA and EPA, especially when it's in a whole sort of food source where you're getting that with linoleic acid, which can actually reduce that conversion even further, or reduce omega-3. So it's absolutely not ideal, and it's I'm sure that it came from some sort of lobbying effort from the seed oil manufacturers saying, "Oh, we need to do this," or just whatever food company or whatever, because say, "Oh, this has to use this because it's cheaper for them."
yeah,
It's cheaper for them. It makes the other ones money. And so it's cheap and easy, and but it's not necessarily right. But now it's in the law; you have to use it
yes.
because we have to get those omega sixes. There's plenty of omega sixes in animal fat, but it's the
Mm,
right kind of omega sixes, and it's a better proportionality between the omega threes and the omega sixes, and you're getting the actual omega threes that you need,
yeah.
as
Mhm,
opposed to the ALA that comes in the seed oils. And then
mm,
there's all these pro-inflammatory. I mean, linoleic acid is very pro-inflammatory.
mm,
It can break down and oxidize and cause neuroinflammation and damages the mitochondria, damages all sorts of things in the body.
yeah.
And so exposing a baby to that is horrible. It's a horrible thing to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and as you said, it causes oxidative stress in the body, it causes inflammation, and
Mm,
they are so small. And the amounts
mm,
that we eat today, we would never have been exposed to ever in our evolution. I think I saw a video, just one bottle of this oil, canola oil or corn, it would be the equivalent of eating corn every day for 40 years. And it's like, you would never have done that
mm.
in a month or whatever, like 40 years of corn,
Yeah, yeah.
and then
Yeah,
we're
that's
giving
it. And yeah, and then you're doing this for years maybe on that formula. So getting the equivalent of like 200 years of corn at the end of it.
yeah, that would also explain why we see these chronic diseases in younger and younger people.
Mm,
It's also like you say, why does it seem like the more money we put into healthcare, the
mm.
sicker we get?
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's also yeah, it's costing more too, and that's
Yeah.
this thing people don't realize that,
Mm,
if we had just better surveillance and we're able to pick these subtle cases up more, like
mm,
why is it that healthcare in America is now in a 20-year period is is now taking 3 times the amount of our GDP,
yeah,
than it was like 20 years ago, and which it is. It was like 6%, 20,
crazy.
30 years ago. Now it's like 18% of our
Yeah.
GDP, and our GDP is bigger. So we're taking a larger percent of a larger pie, and we're thinking that no, 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 it's the same amount of diseases, things like that. Well, that doesn't really make sense. Um, yeah. And I mean, sure, you get new treatments and new things like that. But the fact of the matter is that, if these were happening all the time, why wasn't it causing the amount of disease that we're getting now? It doesn't make sense. It's lazy thinking. They did this in the 90s, saying that, well, type 2 diabetes was renamed that. It used to be called adult onset diabetes, and it was really just middle-aged alcoholics who would get it.
Mm,
And then all of a sudden 10-year-olds were getting type 2 diabetes or adult onset diabetes, and they were getting fatty liver disease, which really only was seen in alcoholics. And I
yeah.
remember the news reports as a kid really said, how is this possible that a 10-year-old is getting adult onset, diabetes? That they're not an adult. How
Yeah.
are they getting adult onset diabetes and they're getting fatty liver disease? Fatty liver only comes in alcoholics. This kid has never had alcohol in his life. He's 10. Okay. So they just said, well, it's probably always happening. We just didn't notice it. And so, well, then how did you notice it now? Right. And so it's just like, okay, that you can do that once. And you just say,
Mm,
okay, it was probably always happening. We just need to pay attention now. Okay. But now we know it's on our radar. Okay. So you can say that once. So why is it that it increased in the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s and now in the 2020s? We're just getting better at screening. We're just getting better. We're getting better. We're getting better. No, we're not. No, you
yeah.
can say that one time. Now it's on your radar. You can see that
Yes.
kids can get type 2 diabetes as well. So
Yeah.
you're looking out for it. You have doctors saying, hey, there's something wrong. Yeah, but look, diabetes shows up. It's diabetes mellitus, which means Latin for basically you're peeing too much and the urine is sweet. That's what that means. Diabetes, it means you're peeing far too much. And so you have a kid just peeing and peeing and peeing and peeing, and they're sick and they're run down and just, oh, I don't really feel good. That's
Yeah.
what you check them for. You check them for diabetes. Right. And so, we would have seen this. Well, it's probably some type 2 diabetics were being misdiagnosed as type 1 diabetics. Totally different disease, massively different. One needs insulin, the other doesn't. So,
Mm.
like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. It's
And
like
one can
different.
produce insulin and the other can't, and so it's a completely different presentation. It's
Yeah.
completely different disease. The end result is you pee a lot and you're
Yeah.
peeing out glucose, but it's wildly different causes and wildly different treatments. And
Mhm.
so, well, except, going back to Osler, they just treated him with a carnivore diet, and that actually worked for both. But, there are different ways of getting to the same point as far as
Mm.
the disease is concerned. So with these other diseases as well, like autoimmunity and cancer especially,
Yes.
yeah, we've got screening, but guess what happens if you don't pick up a cancer early on in screening? It
Mhm.
becomes late stage cancer and you die from it. So you get diagnosed as metastatic cancer versus early stage 1 cancer. You're still
Yes.
getting the same number of diagnoses,
Mm.
right? Except that maybe more people are surviving because you're catching it earlier. That's the argument for screening, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So why is it that 50 years ago cancer was still relatively uncommon, whereas
Mm.
now 1 out of every 2 people in America will develop cancer at some point in their life.
Yeah.
And 100 years ago, there was a book from Wilhelm Stefansson, who was a professor at Harvard, who wrote a book called "Is Cancer a Disease of Civilization?" Now it is termed a disease of civilization. I had
Wow.
a patient. He studied the Inuit, and you see this in studies throughout the 20th century. The Inuit populations, formerly called the Eskimo, they had basically no cancer rates, none. And they were tested and they were screened and all this sort of stuff, no cancer. And then sort
Wow.
of 20-year period, no cancer. Then the next 20-year period, tiny little bit of cancer, but much less than everybody else. Next
Mm.
20-year period, a little bit more, but still, bloody small amounts. And it
Mm.
continued to increase throughout the 20th century as they became more, involved in Western society and started eating more and more of this processed garbage-based Western food. And they started
Mhm.
getting more cancers. I had a patient of mine here, and we were talking about, sort of these ideas about cancer and things like that. And she said that she had a good friend of hers who's a nurse over in Sydney, and she's actually of Maasai descent. And
Wow.
so, yeah, so the Maasai are in Africa, and they traditionally just eat meat, egg, or meat,
Mhm.
milk, and blood from their
Blood.
cattle. And yeah, and they are very healthy, very, very healthy. And we have studies going back to the 1920s showing how healthy they were compared to their neighbors, the Akakuyu, who just ate mostly plants,
Mhm.
whole food plants, living out in the environment. Everything's like a vegan's dream. They're not even wearing shoes. They're grounding all the time. They're in the sun. It's great. And they're
Yes.
very sick and they have all these sort of health issues. The Maasai
Mm.
did not. and they interbred. They had, similar genetic population. And then throughout the 20th century, these diseases started to increase.
Mm,
And now diabetes is a big problem there because they have Coca-Cola trucks driving into the Maasai villages on a daily basis sometimes, just
mm,
delivering Coca-Cola. And people are just buying it and going crazy for it. And now they have diabetes problems when they've never had diabetes problems. Again, this is a disease of civilization. So this lady was Maasai. She ended up going to nursing school, and she was working in Australia and in Sydney as a nurse. And at 40, she developed, she was diagnosed with advanced cancer, and
mm,
she was communicating back with her family back in Africa, and she was having to try to explain to them what cancer was because they'd never even heard of it. They didn't understand the concept because it
yeah.
just was so foreign to them in that
Wow.
population. And it's just like, and she's having to try to explain this to them. And
Wow.
it's interesting too because other people have figured this out long before we have.
Yeah.
For hundreds of years, they were treating these sorts of things in these sorts of ways. But just the native populations, other patients who work with the indigenous Australian population, the Aboriginal Australians, and they were saying that it's part of their culture that when you're in the city and you're doing sorts of things, you start getting sick, you start getting these Western diseases, that these are not normal, and that you basically don't do the Western treatments because they're not any good. And so there's a high rate of people absconding from the hospital, which means that leaving without discharging themselves or being discharged.
Mm,
Um, and I saw that, in these populations. A 20-year-old kid got diagnosed with cancer. People on the
yeah.
team were like, he's probably going to run off. He's probably going to take off because this is just sort of what they do. They try to sort of treat it themselves. Sure enough, next day he was gone. He just didn't say anything, didn't leave a note. He was out. And having spoken to my patients subsequently who work with those populations, they say that in their culture, they have come to the conclusion that the Western treatments are no good for these Western diseases, that the way you treat them is you go off into the country, you go off in the bush and you live with your relatives out in the country the way that they've been living for tens of thousands of years. You're hunting, you're fishing, and you're just chilling out outside and just living naturally. And the problems often resolve. And then
Yeah.
they go back to the city and start the process all over again and get sick and then, go back and things like that. And it'd be nice if they just said, okay, well, maybe eating this crap and living that way is not the way, eating this other stuff. Maybe still living in the city, but still don't eat this garbage that is just absolute poison. It's not just poison for the Australian Aboriginals or the indigenous population. It is poison for everybody. It's just
Yes.
that certain people have had more time to build up resistances to that poison. But that just means that they were poisoned less by lead than other people. They're still getting lead poisoning, but they're just
Mm,
getting it with more exposure. So that doesn't mean that lead's good for them. It just means it's less bad for them. And that's the same thing with these sort of toxic exposures that we're obsessed with including in our
yeah.
diet and our culture.
Yeah. And that just clearly goes to show that it's more about lifestyle and what comes from the outside and not what's going on the inside.
Exactly.
Humans are the only species on this planet that sprays our own food with poison and then eats it.
Yeah.
But we don't
Yeah.
want other
Pretty
animals to
smart.
eat it, but then we
Yeah.
but then we eat it
Yeah.
ourselves. And of course, the glyphosate is made to kill life,
Mhm.
basically, and to poison anything that eats it, so it won't eat it, just like the plants does with
Mhm.
us. But this also, when we eat it, it goes into the stomach. It goes down to our microbiome, our bacteria in the stomach, and it kills off that too.
It
And
does.
so, yeah. And so
Yeah.
I their way of treating disease is actually pretty good for them. Just go out in nature and live how we used to live. Also being exposed to the sun, eating the natural diets.
Mm.
We also see that that affects our microbiome and our immune systems that we are out in the sun. I didn't know that vitamin D was actually a hormone as well.
Mm.
So we need to
Yeah.
kind of balance that as well,
Mhm.
right? If we're not getting enough sun, we're not getting the vitamin D and the hormones. And also, it helps with the ATP. So we get the energy also from the
Mhm.
food, of course. But I want to ask you this because
Mhm.
I've heard it so many times online that people say, oh, but you shouldn't go too low carb if you have thyroid issues because it will lower the pre T3. What's your take on that?
Not that I've ever seen. Yeah, I've got so many patients with Hashimoto's and other thyroid issues that actually improve their T3. I mean, there
Wow.
are studies showing that you don't need as much T3 if you're
Mhm.
ketogenic, because in order to produce the same amount of ATP from glucose versus fat oxidation or ketones, you need far less T3s. In order to, for one glucose molecule,
Mm.
you'll get about 30 to 32 ATP molecules. A perfect situation, maybe 38, but in reality, it's usually about 30 to 32. But one fat molecule, you'll get about 140, right? ATP molecules. So you're getting over 3 times the amount of ATP from one molecule of fat versus one molecule of glucose. It takes the same amount of T3 to drive those processes, right? So
Mm.
you need the exact same amount of T3 to get 3 times the amount of ATP. So you simply don't need as much. And so, it is very much the case that you make energy on demand, and you make it, and your body balances these things out. So it's just like, you're not going to just produce a ton of ATP if you don't need it. Your mitochondria sort of make this stuff on demand. It will move in your cell, it will move to this receptor and produce ATP on the spot right then to
Mhm.
drive a reaction, and then move somewhere else and drive another reaction. Right? It's not just
Mm.
dumping out mass quantities of ATP, and then you just have this available in this sort of this slurry in your cells. It's
Yeah.
making it at the time. And so if you don't have things that you need to do, you're not going to produce more of this ATP. And so your body is going to regulate, say, hey, we don't need all this energy. We don't need to do all this. It's going to regulate how much T3 is out and active and functional, because you just don't need it. Your body
Mhm.
is nothing if not efficient. And so it's not going to waste production of T3 if you just don't need it.
Exactly.
But in reality, I've never seen that. I've never once seen that. I see
Mhm.
people that have, very low T3, very poor conversion of T4 into T3. I see that
Mm.
improve. There are a lot of
Mm.
other factors that go into this as well. First of all, number one cause of hypothyroidism, as we've discussed,
Yeah.
is Hashimoto's. Well,
Yeah.
carnivore diet, for all the reasons we've discussed, helps address the root cause of Hashimoto's, and the thyroid function starts to improve. Okay, so
Mm.
TSH comes down, T4 goes up, T3 goes up. I
Mm.
see that across the board. And then on top of that, you're improving your bioavailability. So you're getting more selenium, you're getting more zinc, you're getting more iodine. And
Mhm.
these are all things that are required for
Yes.
thyroid function. Iodine you need just to make thyroid hormone in the first place. And you're
Mhm.
not eating goitrogens that are a entire category of plant toxin that block out iodine uptake in the thyroid, things like cyanide from almonds or cassava, but also the isothiocyanates from things like leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables like kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. These are just replete with these goitrogens that will damage your thyroid function. So even if
Yeah.
you have an abundance of iodine in your
Mm.
diet, it's not getting into the cells where it needs to be if you're eating all of these leafy greens and almonds and cassava and other sorts of things. And then the zinc, we know that these things like phytic acid will block out zinc absorption, but there's so many other things that do as well. Some human studies have shown that just 120 grams of black beans will block out around 75% of zinc absorption in
Mm.
humans, and that corn, 120 grams of corn, in this study's case, corn tortillas, knocked out almost 100% of zinc absorption, right? You have
Wow.
to have zinc and selenium to convert T4 into T3. And people know about the selenium, they forget about the zinc. They say, oh, no,
Mm.
my selenium's fine. What about your zinc? And also, again, these reference ranges for these nutrients are based on averages of the average population who are sick and malnourished. And so,
Yes.
oh, my selenium's great. Is it? Because if it's in that reference range, then you're just average for everybody else who is deficient, right? And
Mm.
also, you have to test these things in certain ways, because selenium, zinc, magnesium, folate, these nutrients are active in the cells. And there's over 99% of them are in the cells, and they're active in the cells. You have to know the level that's in the cells, because there's no correlation between the cellular level and the serum level. So if you say,
Mm.
oh, my serum level's low or it's high or it's normal, that does not mean anything about what's in the cell, and you need to know what's in the cells. You have to check the red blood cell levels of these. So most people are only checking selenium, they're not checking zinc, and they're checking selenium serum levels as opposed or plasma levels instead of the red cell levels. So it's not good
Yes.
information, right? And so if you're not testing these things properly, you're not understanding what you could be missing, it's a big problem. This makes perfect sense. I mean, I see this sort of as an aside. I see people that are struggling with weight loss, even on a good diet, ketogenic diet, carnivore diet, if they're deficient in certain nutrients, it is very hard for the body to start losing excess body fat until those nutrient levels are corrected. And I think there's a perfectly good explanation for that, which again is you don't need ATP just to dump it out. So you're not just going to, hey, let's just ramp up and burn all this fat and just have 50 billion times the amount of ATP floating around than you need.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Your body's never going to do that. And so you're only going to ramp up your energy production and utilization to demand. So what is your
Yes.
energy demand for? Is to drive cellular processes in your cells. You need zinc and selenium and magnesium and folate and B12 and all these other nutrients, these micronutrients, to drive those reactions. And if you don't have enough of them, then there's no point in ramping up your metabolism because there's nothing to do with that energy. And again, it's demand driven. It's not just, oh, we have a lot of fat, so let's burn it. It's going to get burned to do something. And if you hit a bottleneck, you run out of the substance and the substrate to do something with that, it's not going to go anywhere. And so there's a perfectly reasonable example of this in thyroid, right? Which is you make T4. T4 is a storage form of T3. It's not really biologically active like T3 is, and so it gets converted into T3. Okay, but T4 can go sort of down two pathways. It can either go down T3 pathway and boost your metabolism, or it can go down the reverse T3 pathway, which is sort of like an inactive version of T3. And we call it reverse T3, but it's similar to T3 and it's similar enough that it can bind to the T3 receptors. It just doesn't activate them. And so it blocks them out. If you have the same level of T3, but you have half the receptors, you'll get half the response, right? And so, it's like if you're doing cocaine all the time, all of a sudden your brain is just like, hey, this is too much signal. We need to reduce the receptors. And that's why you do more cocaine. And you have to do more and more cocaine to get the same response because you have less receptors. Your body's trying to protect yourself from this overabundance of this signal. And so if you have less receptors for your T3, you're going to have less action. Okay, so then again, you have less T3, but what's your reverse T3? Oh, hey, look, that's right low. So actually you have more functional T3 as well. So that's another issue as well. Your body can convert into reverse T3 if it's trying to slow down your metabolism. So if you're not getting out in the sun enough, your leptin's getting high, you're having all these sort of metabolic issues. One of the ways your body, if you're under eating, you're not eating enough, your body will say, hey, look, we need to slow down our metabolism. One of the ways your body does that is by shunting over into the reverse T3 side of things to slow down your metabolism.
Yes.
But you also have to have zinc and selenium to go down the active T3 pathway, right? And so quite simply, if you're nutritionally deficient, your body's going to say, there's no point in making more energy because we're not nutritionally replete. We need to slow things down. And so, hey, you don't have enough zinc and selenium. No. This is going down reverse T3, right? So your body's going to control this in all these different sorts of ways. It's very sophisticated. It's a lot more sophisticated than the people that are just blanketly saying, oh, you need carbs to blah, blah, blah. There's way more involved. There's way more involved in that. And in reality, in practice, in real life, that's not what we see. So in the studies that follow people on ketogenic diets for multiple years, they don't find reduction in thyroid function. They don't find hypothyroidism. They find absolutely, euthyroid levels. They don't find elevated cortisol or anything like that. You have people that are saying, I added back in carbs after, years and years and years on a carnivore diet. And many of them are even saying, yeah, my thyroid was fine, my cortisol was fine, but, I felt that it was better for some other reason. Okay, well, there you go. And then people say, oh, look, people are adding back in carbs is because their thyroid and their cortisol. No, they explicitly said it was not because of that, right? And that's just not what we see in the studies either. And I've never seen that in my practice. I've been treating people with ketogenic carnivore diets for nearly a decade now. And I've never once seen that. I've never once seen somebody actually drop their thyroid function. Great selenium, great zinc, great iodine. Your TSH is very low. Your T4 is perfect, and you see slightly reduced T3, conversion of T4 into T3. But they're healthy. They're fine. They're doing great. That's probably your body saying, "Hey, we don't need as much T3."
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So there's a lot of nuance there, but no, that's just not the case.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. Like the body wouldn't create anything extra that it doesn't need to create because the body is always trying to reserve energy to ensure our survival and also to just in case. something would
Mm.
happen and we need that extra energy. And when it comes to fat, the body wants to keep fat because traditionally we would not have been finding so many carbs that we can do today, especially in Sweden. Like there's only like sweet things to find in summertime. The rest of the year, it's too cold. We cannot find
Mm.
any carbohydrates. So imagine
Mm.
the adaptation there.
Yeah.
We're not adapted to eating as many carbs, but our body wants to store fats, especially in women, because if we would get pregnant, then we would have those extra reserves in case we wouldn't find food or we couldn't get food for some reason, then we would have that extra. But it makes so much sense what you're saying. I also think that the body gets more efficient in using certain things when it doesn't have to handle with all that high glucose, and it's more efficient in just balancing it out itself. And I think that our body is very sophisticated. And I do believe that we do not understand the body fully. We do not understand
Yeah.
the immune system fully. We do not
Mm.
understand nutrition fully. But I think proof is in the pudding. And if it has worked, why not treat everyone with that and then do the studies around why it's working instead of, no, we have to find what's working and we need studies first. Like, why
Mm.
do that approach? Like, do what's
Yeah.
working, then find the studies why it's working, is my
Yeah.
opinion.
Well, right. And people are trying different things and they're getting different results and say, okay, well, study it and see why that is. We're seeing a signal that people are improving their health and they're reversing diseases. I mean, that deserves to be studied. And so, and then it might be that, hey, look, we had this study with 10,000 people and we found that it actually, it's just sort of like some people get it and some don't. Well, that's useful information too, that at least, hey, this works for some people. Well, we know it works for some people because
Yes.
we're seeing it work for some people. How many people does it work for? How often does it work? Does it work for everybody every time? In my experience, yeah, it does, especially for certain illnesses.
Hmm.
But that is worth studying, and we have started to make some of these studies. I mean, there are thousands of randomized controlled trials in humans looking at ketogenic diets and showing how massively that improves health as well. But the thing is that to me, nutrition is very easy. It's species specific. It's according to our biology, and what you've been eating the longest is what you're most adapted to. We have bioavailability. We have all these different nutrients. We have all these different signals saying, that stuff that we've been eating for the last several million years, really the last 8 million years, and almost exclusively for the last 2 million years in the Arctic Circle during the ice ages when there's nothing else to eat except meat, that's probably what we should be eating. And seeing as that biologically we have understood that humans have been apex predators for millions of years, and this is just our just biological system and our requirements. It's like looking at a lion. Lions are carnivores. That's just biologically the kind of animal that they are. Same with dolphins. And so if you have a dolphin or you have a lion who is eating their natural diet and they're eating meat and there's a problem, you're not going to think, they probably need some damn carbs for for that thyroid. It's like, no, like that, this is their biological design. They
Yeah.
don't need that, And so when I look at someone who's doing like a carnivore diet and they're doing better and they're improving, and then something goes off a little bit, like, oh, hey, what's going on? Maybe they need carbs. Everybody's an individual, beautiful snowflake. It's like, yes, they are, but so are lions, and not a single damn lion out there is going to do better on carbs than they are on meat. And so because I take that as read that humans, the same physical laws, the same laws of the reality apply to humans as they do lions and every other animal, and
Mhm.
that humans are carnivores. That's just the kind of animal we are. There is an optimal diet for us, just like there are for lions and dolphins, that if we're having that optimal diet, we don't need to change that. If you have a lion in captivity and something's wrong, you don't need to like take it off of its optimal diet. That's never the solution. And so I don't look at that as a solution for us either. And so because I don't take the easy way out and say, oh, well, maybe just eat some carbs and maybe for you, salad's good. That's a cop out. And that's sort of, it's a lazy answer. And so I don't do that. And so I say, okay, I'm going to assume that that's not the answer. And so I'm assuming that there's something else. And so I keep looking, I keep digging, and I keep finding. And so I have yet to find a single example where this doesn't work. Where it
Mhm.
was one for all, well, I guess just carnivore is not right for you. Every single person that I've ever worked with, we have been able to find solutions and things that work, and it's fine. Oh yes, that's it. Sometimes it's just time. Sometimes it takes a long time that people's, metabolic system, their mitochondrial system is just dysfunctional, and it takes a long time for that to heal, but it
Yep.
does. And maybe short term they could feel better with carbohydrates, but they feel worse in all these other ways, and it's holding them back and from getting actually better long term. And,
Yeah.
just like if you have low energy and you do some meth, you're gonna have more energy. But you know what? That doesn't mean that's good for you and that you're doing well with that and that's gonna provide long-term health benefits. And so I don't look at that
Yeah.
as like, "Oh, that's gonna be a solution for some people." I assume it's not. And so I look for other things, and that's why I find them. I find them more often than other people. If
Exactly.
you're Yeah, and so, like, people say, "Well, maybe for some women during the luteal phase, need a bit of carbs." How would that have worked in nature? When you're in the middle, you have the Sami up in the middle, up by the North Pole. Oh, it's just like, every month they need a week of carbs. And what are they doing? They're just digging into the frozen tundra to like get at some root vegetables and things like that. And
Yeah.
how would they know? How would they know without a dietitian telling them that they needed to do that? And so, the simple fact that they exist and that they're able to have kids with no carbs means you
Yes.
don't need carbs to have kids. And in fact, you have carbs that raises insulin. Insulin blocks estrogen production in women, which actually can cause infertility as well. So it's exactly the opposite of what people are being told and what we're being told. Lions don't go digging up root tubers to get their carbohydrates even during their luteal phase.
Mm.
It's just like if you've ever watched nature, I've never seen a single. I've been watching nature videos, especially about lions, ever since I was a kid. Never
Yeah.
seen one time where they said, "Oh yeah, the female lions dig up tubers because of when they're going through estrus and they need carbohydrates." And it's like, no, they
That's
don't. They
true.
just eat
That's
meat,
true. They
you
wouldn't
know,
do that.
and they don't, and so we shouldn't
No.
either.
No. So how many carbs do we need?
Zero.
But vegetable is good, right, doctor?
Well, you have to ask yourself which vegetables. 'Cause vegetables are not vegetables are not vegetables. They all have different toxins in them. There's 400,000 plants in the world. Most of them will kill you. They're all vegetables. They're all leafy green. They're literally green leaves, and most of them will kill you. Most of those green leaves will kill you. And so, the amount of vegetation that is accessible to us is a few hundred species that and then we've grown that to a couple thousand that we can ferment and cook and break down in other sorts of ways that make them inedible to edible. But again, that's proof positive we're not designed to eat these damn things because we don't have the ability to break down those toxins naturally. Because, oh, we need more legumes. Legumes are so good for you. Really? You eat red kidney beans and you'll die if you don't cook them properly, right?
Yes.
So how is that our natural diet
Yeah.
if we eat them in their natural form, right? We
Yeah.
have to cook them, and we've only figured out that we can even cook these things in the last 10,000 years. So clearly that's not what we evolved on. And clearly that's not
Yes.
something that's going to provide massive benefits to our health. So the amount of vegetables you need is zero. No, they're not good for you. They are living creatures, they're sentient creatures. They have very sophisticated defense mechanisms. They cannot run away or fight back like an animal can. So they make about 1 million different defensive chemicals, most of which will kill you on the spot. Very few we have a little bit of resistance to. And we have, through technology, figured out ways of breaking down and more of these defense chemicals so that we can tolerate them more. But you don't get rid of all the toxins. It gets rid of maybe 80% of them in some cases, different for different amounts. But that little bit builds up over time and actually can cause physiological stress, harm, and disease. And we call those diseases, and we call those diseases of civilization. And
Mm.
so, I mean, really, really simply, you see populations that don't eat these things, they don't get these diseases. And they do eat these things, they do get these diseases. So you tell me, do
Yeah.
plants cause disease? I sure as hell think they do.
And I think that we also have been taught not to think for ourselves and not to listen to
Hmm.
our bodies because I
Hmm.
think it's pretty instinctual. If you look at children, they do not like vegetables.
No,
They spit out the
really
broccoli.
gross.
Yeah. But if you give them a sandwich with a lot of butter on, they will eat the butter first.
Mm.
And they sometimes leave the sandwich because they know what they want. They know what tastes good because they know it contains nutrients. But then in time, we get so brainwashed into thinking, no, we need greens. And I think that this brainwash goes so deep because we've heard it ever since we were kids. Like, kids,
Yeah.
eat your vegetables in school, at home, everywhere we go. we don't think it tastes good, but we get used to it because we're forced to eat it basically. And we're brainwashed into thinking that it's healthy.
And our parents were too.
Yeah.
So it's like multi-generational.
Yeah. And so they do the same to us. And then it
Mhm.
just goes like this in generations. Everyone's telling everyone that we need to eat these green things when we don't. And then we get disease and it continues in families. Another thing is a lot of the times, like in my family, a lot of the women has had Hashimoto's.
Mhm.
And maybe it's something also with the habits that you teach your kids how to eat. And you teach them the same way as you eat. But that way of eating led you to disease. So it probably will lead to the same in them, but you don't know that you're passing it forward because we are not taught how our bodies work and what proper nutrition looks like. I think, like you mentioned earlier, that it's not fair that we have to live the last 20 years of our lives in chronic illness. It wouldn't have to be like that, but since we're not taught about these things, it just gets like that and nobody understands why because
Yeah.
they follow the guidelines. And a lot of people say that it's because the people don't listen to the doctors. It's actually the opposite. They listen too much. And the ones who follows it to the
Yeah.
T, they get the sickest. And
Mm.
so both of my parents, they're chronically ill. A lot of the damage that has been done, it might not be reversible. A lot of the damage is reversible. I'm seeing it in my mother, but she was in the sick care system for 30 years. Finally, she actually got a doctor who was going against the system. I cannot say his name because then he will get fired. But basically, the sick care system was sending all the patients that was too costly for the state because we have a socialistic society in Sweden. So we pay taxes and then we get sick care. And so she was too costly because she went with the ambulance. She was having
Yeah.
to stay at the hospital and she was a type 2 diabetic, but they were recommending her that when her blood sugar was low, she was supposed to eat fruit. And then she crashed and
Yeah.
then she had to go in the ambulance. And when she had done that enough times, she was going in twice a week because she fainted. And then
Mm.
after that, they actually sent her to this doctor who was going against the grain in the medical system. And he was telling her, they are killing you. You need to go LCHF, so a low carb diet, a
Yeah.
ketogenic
Good.
diet. And every patient that they sent to him, he only took 5 patients a year. And every patient that went to him got healthy. So if they were too costly, they sent the patients to him and he would get them healthy. And he did never talk about his methods with them.
Mm.
They just knew it worked when they sent people to him. And he was trying to educate dietitians so that he could send people to them. But no dietitian wanted to take this approach because that would mean that they could get fired if
Mm.
anyone found out that they do not treat their patients correctly by following what they're supposed to be telling the patients, which doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, good for him, and it's great that your mom got in to see him.
Yes.
That's really helpful, and it's interesting that sort of the mainstream, doctors there are too expensive. To send him to this guy that actually can help her and actually get better. Shouldn't you ask him what the hell he's doing, and maybe you adopt that, and then you treat people in that way too, so that you don't have this going on over and over and over again? It's interesting. It's
Yeah.
also depressing because it's like at least they recognize that,
Yes.
hey, this guy has these methods that actually cure these diseases as opposed to just perpetuate the diseases. But you know what? We're not interested in actually doing that ourselves.
Yeah.
We're going to keep just doing this bullshit because it's easier and that's what we got trained to do. That's kind of depressing at the same time.
But people have to feed their families. So
Yeah.
I understand that they don't want to risk. If you're a doctor, you've gone to school for so many years, you have to pay
Mm,
for the education also, and you have to put food on the table. So I
mm.
understand people working in the system. What I do not agree with is the system, and
No.
they
Yeah.
they claim to want to help people,
No.
but really that's not
Well,
the case.
if you reward treating symptoms, you'll get a
Mm,
system that treats symptoms. If you
yes.
reward treating and curing disease, then you'll get a system that treats and cures the root cause of disease. We've
Hmm.
built the first. That's what we have right now. So we need to develop a way and a system of actually doing the second. And honestly, that's usually used to be what it was. We just have to look at what the hell we used to do. And because doctors back in Osler's day, that's what doctors looked to do. They were trying to cure diseases. They were trying to better humanity. Now they're just trying to, pad their pocketbook and improve their bottom line for their shareholders. Now we have these drug companies, and we just transposed those good thoughts and assumed the same intentions on them, that they're trying to cure diseases. And me growing up, I thought that too. We have this disease, oh, they're going to find a pill for that. I'm sure they'll find a pill that will
Mhm.
help that and this and the other. That's just how we were taught. That's how we were taught to think, and it's not the case. And they've said it themselves. Goldman Sachs had a report that one of their analysts wrote, and it asked the question, is curing someone of a disease a viable business model? The answer, of
Mhm.
course, was no. And we have to start looking at things and rewarding people for actually looking for cures. Right now,
Yes.
this is perpetuating the disease state and not looking for cures. That's what gets rewarded. And
Mm.
so, fine. So we need to find a way to reward curing these diseases as well, or at least prevent these other people from suppressing the cures, because people are doing this. We have ketogenic diets. We were showing that for hundreds of years that
Yeah.
you can reverse diabetes with an animal meat based carnivore diet, basically
Mhm.
ketogenic carnivore diet. That's been in the literature. That's been in the top medical textbooks for hundreds of years. So we've
Yeah.
known that, and now
Yeah.
we're trying to say, "No, no, 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 no. It gets worse if you do that." So, okay, so you don't wanna look for a cure, fine. You should damn well not be able to suppress that information, though, and
Mhm.
to block and try to go after people. I mean, there were cereal companies that have said, and they actually they came after different doctors in Australia who then sued for the minutes of these cereal companies, and they said, "This damn ketogenic diet movement is killing our cereal sales. We need to come after these doctors that are promoting it and get their licenses taken away so that we
Mhm.
can discredit them and say, oh, these are just quacks. They're just disqualified doctors. Don't
Yeah.
listen to them." And that's exactly what they say. You see people like Dr. Allo and others that are saying they just push that whole status quo, eat junk food, it's fine. Allo said at one point, I think he said something like, sugar cereals. What's wrong with Fruit Loops? That it's just food. There's nothing wrong with food. Okay, then what's wrong with steak? Steak is food too. Oh no, but that causes heart disease. And Fruit Loops is fine, and it's just like, this is insane. And these people are pushing against things that actually help people. So they're doing the antithesis of what actual doctors are supposed to do. They sued for these minutes from the cereal companies, and they named certain doctors like Dr. Gary Fettke by name and said, we need to discredit these people. And that's how these other people saying, oh, these are just discredited doctors. All the ones that push ketogenic or carnivore, they're all discredited doctors. They've all lost their license and things like
Mhm.
that. And in fact, most of the time that's not true, but they just paint it with that brush. And that's the narrative. That's the
Mhm.
marketing strategy. That's the propaganda that they're trying to push out there. Oh, this is just discredited doctors and things like that. Well,
Mhm.
some of them have lost their license or had their licenses attacked, and that's because you did it and you came
Mhm.
after them and tried to suppress that. So that should be criminal, to try to get someone's medical license taken away and have them spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees protecting themselves when they did absolutely nothing wrong, like Dr.
Mhm.
Gary Fettke did. Those people should be held criminally accountable for that,
Yes.
not just, oh, you get a fine. I don't even think they got fined. But A, they should be fined and have to pay damages, and they
Mhm.
should absolutely go to jail for doing some
Yes.
bullshit like that.
Yeah.
And until you do that, this is just going to keep going, because it's just like, yeah, who cares? You're just going to keep doing it, and they're going to keep making money that way. And,
Yeah.
so maybe it's not profitable for any corporations to just tell people, hey, don't eat certain things and you'll get better. And you'll cure these diseases. These diseases are caused by eating these certain things, but you should at least not make it profitable for them to lie and cover this up and attack the people who are trying to educate
Yes.
people and get them health.
Yes. Especially when you know that they have an interest. They own a company
Mm,
like, of course they're gonna say that Fruit Loops are healthy.
yeah.
They're not stupid. Like, of course they want to increase their sales.
Okay, you want to profit, but you shouldn't be allowed to profit by any means necessary, right? Like, it could be found that, Boeing could rob national treasuries and banks and things like that. And they go, hey, we could make a lot of money doing this, and that would help our investors. Like, yeah, but not by any means necessary, not by criminal means.
Exactly.
Right? That's a given. And so
Yeah.
these people are actually doing these things criminally. They're putting out fraudulent studies and papers. They're paying people to lie
Yes.
and put forward, false information to try to push that's just marketing. No, it's not. That's criminal
Mm.
behavior. And different drug companies are doing that. The tobacco
Yeah.
industry, perfect example. For 50 years, they lied and deceived, and they put out fraudulent information and studies and paid people to put out more information and say that no, tobacco didn't cause problems, didn't cause emphysema, it wasn't addictive, and it didn't cause cancer, knowing full well that it did,
Yeah.
poisoning people, making $50 billion a year in their worldwide sales. And then they got fined for $200 billion. That's
Well,
4 years gross sales. That's nothing. They lied for 50 years,
mm.
right? And put out a harmful product on the market. That is a criminal act. And
Yes.
they're not treated criminally. They're not prosecuted criminally. And they're
Yeah.
not even fined more than they gained over that 50-year period. They got
Mm.
fined 4 years worth of gross sales. At the time that they got that judgment against them of like $200 billion over the span of 25 years, by the way, it wasn't just that year
Right.
that they had to pay it. They made in their worldwide sales about $50 billion, right? So that's gross, that's not net, but still, they sold $50 billion worth of product, right?
Yeah.
So $200 billion, I mean, it looks like, my gosh, that's such a huge no, it's not. Not compared to the trillions of dollars that they made in profit over the
Yes.
past 50 years, where they knowingly put a product on the market that killed people, that they knew killed people. And the drug companies are doing this as well. They put out drugs that cause harm. They market them in illegal ways that cause harm, that cause death of tens of thousands of people. And what happens? They get fined $3 billion, $4 billion, but they made $24 billion, $35 billion. So it's a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
And those people who made those decisions, those criminal decisions to put out a harmful, toxic component that they knew was going to kill people,
Mm.
they didn't face any jail time. Even when they perjured themselves in front of Congress, in front of the court, they lied, and they didn't even get held in contempt of court or get found guilty of perjury. So they're not being fined enough. If you make $35 billion
Oh.
doing something harmful and illegal that kills people, you should
Yeah.
be fined more than $35 billion so
Mm.
that this is not profitable to
Mm.
do this.
Mm.
And those people making those decisions and actioning out those decisions when they knew that they were causing harm should be going to jail.
Yeah.
If you hit someone with a car by accident, you may go to jail for decades for manslaughter, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these people are killing tens of thousands of people, knowing that they're going to kill tens of thousands of people.
Mm.
So, that's malice of forethought. There was intent there. They know this is going to kill people. They did it anyway, just because it
Yeah.
was going to make them some money. So now, just paying 10% or so of what they made in sales,
Mm.
they're just going to bake that into the price of their product. And
Mm.
that's going to be a reasonable risk to take. And it's just a cost of doing business. It's almost, it amounts to little more than a licensing fee. It's just
Yeah.
like, all right, well, we'll have to pay 10% in a licensing fee. And we'll just keep doing it. So that's worth it. They may not even get caught. The amount of
That's
times
the
that
thing.
that these companies have been caught, sued, and fined is almost certainly a very small fraction of the amount of times that these criminal sort of behaviors have happened. So it's just, it's a game of Russian roulette.
Yes.
And the good thing about it is Russian roulette with a BB gun. Worst case scenario, you get a sting on the side of the head and just keep going, right? It's not that they get fined to the point that it's just like, this is just not a viable business model. This is not possible. This is not something we should do, because we're just going to lose more money than we stand to gain. But again, you don't get to maximize profits criminally. You don't get to say, hey, we'll make a lot more money if we rob the First National Bank. So let's just get a team of black ops sort of guys to go in and rob the vault. Like, well, obviously you can't do that. That's a criminal action. So
Yeah.
is lying and putting forward this bullshit to lie and hurt people and cause harm and death. That's illegal
100%.
too. And
One.
until that's treated in the same way, none of this is going to change.
Yeah. But it's pretty clear that there's a lot of corruption. Just saying the things you're saying, it's so obvious. Like anyone listening to you right now would say the same thing. If you purposely try to make people sicker, of course, that's super criminal. You should go to jail. You should pay all the money back to the families. But they are like the mafia.
Oh, yeah.
They're like the drug dealers. They do not
Yep.
care about people's health. And it's clear that there's corruption both in the government, but also in the medical care system.
There's something called the Sunshine Act in the U.S.,
Mhm.
and that means that anything that a rep buys you dinner or buys you this or coffee or something like that, that gets put down as down on that, and you can sort of see, oh, this person is getting all this sort of money from whatever.
Mm.
Or direct payments or whatever, and you can't really get direct payments just for like, hey, we're just going to give you $10,000 just for fun,
Yeah.
because that's obviously no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
But buying you a trip or buying you gifts or this, that, and the other, and there are
Mhm.
limitations and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so that was trying to help with that exact problem. The problem with that though is it's a superficial fix, and so the people saying, oh no, doctors can't get paid because of the Sunshine Act or whatever, those are probably doctors that are on the take. Absolutely, because there are so many
Yeah.
other ways. I mean, so a good example of this was the OxyContin issue with Purdue Pharmaceuticals. It's not Purdue University; it's a private company, Purdue, with the Sackler family, who privately owned that, and they were paying
Mm.
doctors in different ways. I believe they were doing things like um, giving them big checks to go and give like a talk at a conference or something like that. They're paying them to give keynote addresses and things like that. Whereas they may not be given anything, but they're saying, hey, I'm paying you for a service. Hey, come give this talk. We want to give you, and you're allowed to get speaking fees and all that sort of stuff. But would they have gotten those
Mm.
speaking fees if they weren't pumping out a whole bunch of prescriptions for their drug every month? That's the argument. And that's the concern. So you can pay them in speaking fees. They can have them, give talks and lectures at different sort of conferences, or even just like a board meeting and some sort of event that they just sort of put on. And they'll just say, hey, we've got this event. We'll bring you in to talk, and we'll give you, 10 grand or whatever. And, and, and then other sort of ways they can pay them as well. So for like vaccines, for instance, for like childhood vaccines,
Yes.
it is the case that a lot of pediatricians, they make a large portion of their salary per year based on how many of their kids are on like the full schedule. So if they get 85% of their kids fully vaccinated, they get a bonus, or 90% or 95%. Those bonuses go up. Okay, well, how do they do that? Well, the Sunshine Act protects it because they use a middleman. So these big medical
Oh.
groups, especially like the big HMOs and hospitals, they buy millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars worth of these, medications and treatments and things like that they use in the site, and they mark it up. Is a bit dodgy as well. You're not allowed to own, like a doctor's not allowed to own the pharmacy that they then prescribe to and say, hey, you need all these drugs and buy them from me here at this pharmacy, right? Other people do it, nutritionists and naturopaths will do that with supplements and things like that, but
Yeah.
you're not supposed to. It's a conflict of interest. But then, giving somebody like a vaccine, you upcharge for that. So you've bought all the vaccines, now you charge them that. Honestly, it's sort of, I think that crosses that line. But either way,
Mm.
the hospital, maybe it's because the hospital owns it and you don't own it, whatever. But either way, when they buy all these millions of dollars worth of vaccines, economies of scale, if they're buying more and using more, then the price goes down. And so they get potentially millions of dollars off from the drug company. So if they're using a lot of these things, so if they're at 85%, 90%, 95, vaccination rates for these
Oh.
kids, it will reduce, the HMO will get a big reduction in the price of those vaccines. And so they save millions of dollars, and then they pass that on to the doctors. They might give them
Yeah.
thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, maybe even over $100,000 if they're at a very high vaccination schedule, which is one of the reasons why you'll hear stories of
Mm.
patients who say, oh, I'm not too sure about this. I don't know if I want to do that for my kid or for myself. And they say, well, look, if you're not going to listen to me, you're not going to take my advice,
Mhm.
I can't treat you as a doctor. You're going to have to go somewhere else. And they fire you as a patient. And that can very well be because they don't want to screw up their bonuses and their bonus schedule. And that happens. And that's pretty awful to think about.
Yeah. And especially with the vaccines, there are so many compounds in vaccines
Mm.
that be harmful for a little baby. Before there was like 5 vaccines for babies or something. and now we're closer to 20 vaccines.
Yeah.
And because you have studied this, but the immune system is not fully developed until you're
What, 6 months? Yeah. But then you're giving vaccines like at day one. It's like, well, why are you doing that? I mean,
yeah
the immune system's not even working. So, let's say that it's 100% safe and there's no issues with any of these vaccines. Let's say that. It's still, there's still shouldn't be an incentive model for putting these things out there. And still it is the patient's right and the parent's right to choose what goes inside their body or their child's body. It has to be, right? It's part of the
yeah
Nuremberg Code. It's like you
yeah
can't coerce people through duress or force to accept medical treatment, especially experimental medical treatment that
yeah
they don't want to put in their body. And the thing is that people don't realize violation of the Nuremberg Code is punishable by death. And so people say, no, 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 you have to do it no matter what. I'd be like, really? Because that's really not what this piece of paper says. And so,
Mhm.
most countries are signatories of the Nuremberg Code. I believe pretty much all of European countries are. Australia, America, Canada are certainly. And there's no problem taking these sorts of things. It still has to be the patient's choice. And if you're a doctor, and it shouldn't be, an incentive to treat your patients or keep a patient based on money that you're receiving from on the back end, right? That is an unethical standpoint for any doctor. That if a patient doesn't want to go ahead with your treatment and you profit from that treatment, you should not be
Mm.
fire them as a patient and get rid of them. That is extremely unethical and immoral.
Yes. Yeah.
Say, I'm not going to treat you if you're not going to make me a maximum amount of money. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That is absolutely absurd sort of thing. But the main thing is that there are sneaky ways of feeding people money. And I remember talking to a friend of mine. He was like a regional manager for major pharmaceutical companies previously,
Mhm.
since moved on. But I asked him, I said, okay, when you were working in the pharmaceutical industry, if you had a doctor and a provider that had a whatever drug that you were pushing, if they were at 95% prescription capacity for their patients,
Mm.
what would you give them immediately? $10,000 to $15,000. It's just bang. It was like it's like, yeah, $10,000 to $15,000. That's what we give them.
Okay.
And so that's the thing. There are ways of getting around the Sunshine Act. There are ways of getting around these sorts of things. I have a good friend of mine who was a regional director for Stryker, and he was saying that there are absolutely ways of getting money to doctors without people knowing about it. And or not even just doctors, but other people in decision-making positions where they say, yes, we want this $40 million addition to our hospital with all this gear, and having some sort of, third-party kickbacks going to them. There are ways. There are ways of doing that. And
Mm.
they're not always legal, but they're not technically illegal.
That's the
It's just they're just sort of they're achieving the same end that if you just gave them that money straight across, that would be illegal. But they did it in this circuitous way, and therefore it wasn't technically illegal. And so that's what we have to understand as well.
This is so horrible.
Hmm.
I can't
Yeah.
believe that this is the current system, and it's so crazy how they tell us that it's our body's system that are at fault when it's really the medical system, the healthcare system that is the problem.
Yeah. They're working actively against us to make it so that they can continue on their profit model and profit from us being sick, from buying the things that make us sick and then treating the problems that come about from eating those things. And they're
Exactly.
not going to stop that. They're not going to just give that up. I mean, they're making tens of trillions of dollars a year, literally tens of trillions of dollars a year, not just one company, but the entire system. What we need to do is make them obsolete. We need to make it so we don't need them for that, and that if they want to turn a profit, that they have to actually provide benefit for humanity as opposed to just perpetuating a disease state that we don't need to live in. And so we just need to educate people and get out of that disease state, and then they will have to switch tracks to then actually
Mm.
start providing benefit for humanity. And that's my whole purpose in doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, and you are really a hero in your own right, and I so much look up to you, and you made me realize so many things, things we have spoken about today, but other things as well. And just hearing also a doctor, I think it's important because people trust authorities still. I don't know
Mm,
why, but they still do. So just being you and being a medical doctor and have the bravery to go out and talk about these things is really something that I appreciate so much. And I look up to people like you that
mm,
dares to speak the truth, even when it goes against the grain, even when it goes against power and money. And actually, they can't go after you.
mm,
Talking about these things, it's not playing with small game. Like
mm.
it's like you said, there are trillion-dollar industries.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really admirable, and I think you are proof that it's working. Like you have accomplished so many things. If a person would accomplish one of those things that you have done in your lifetime, it would be amazing. And I think that goes to show that you are capable of doing so much things, but it takes you to be healthy for you to be able to do all these things. Many people, they probably want to do that, but they can't. They don't have the energy, or they don't have the possibilities because they don't have the knowledge. And so
Mm,
you spreading awareness is really so cool. And I think
mm,
that's going to make the biggest change for the world because it's going to create a ripple effect and you're changing people's lives. You're a true healer. I think you are amazing. And I just want
mm,
to encourage you to keep going. And that I hope your account gets so big. I hope everyone hears this and sees this podcast because things needs to change. It's pretty clear. I think every third person today has a chronic disease.
mhm,
And so that's a lot of people. And about 50% of the population has some form of psychological issues.
mm,
And you and I, we know that the gut brain axis, that the gut is connected to the brain. And so a lot of the psychological things are also due to nutrition and to inflammation and things like that. So thank you for doing your work, and you are a true hero, and the world needs more people like you, and the world
mm.
truly needs to hear this message.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say. And I don't think I'm a hero. I know I'm not a hero. I'm just trying to educate people. This is information that everybody deserves to know. And I think it's our birthright to be healthy. All life on earth is healthy unless something happens to it. And so
Yeah.
we should be healthy and we should be able to enjoy our lives and raise our kids and just be happy. And life has a lot of enough problems without
Yes.
being sick all the time and being miserable and having to spend a quarter or a third of our income on treating those illnesses or more. Oftentimes it's more. So, I just want people to just know that they can be healthy and it's completely within their power. And so they can just get on living their life. That should just be the baseline of humanity, is just to be healthy. And then we should have medicine to treat
Yeah.
the other 10% of things that aren't coming from poisoning ourselves and not getting the right inputs and right nutrition. About 90% of the things that people are dying from nowadays are these non-communicable chronic diseases. About 92% of the office visits for doctors are these chronic conditions as well. So most of those will go away if people just start eating right and getting the right inputs. And so then we go back to that 10% of things that are outside of that. And that's what real
Exactly.
medicine is. That's the accidents, emergencies, the childbirth, the infectious disease, the snake bites, those sorts of
Mm.
things. That's real medicine that we can actually better people's health. Right now, we're just trying to play catch up on people's health getting destroyed by what we're doing to ourselves. Where normally we should just be healthy, everybody's fine, and there's an accident. Okay, now we can help with that. Right now, it's sort of the opposite, and so that's not real medicine to me. That's damage control, and it's missing point. It's missing what the cause is, and not treating the root cause. You break
Mm.
your leg or something like that, you fix the broken leg, right? That's not symptom management. That's treating the direct issue, right?
Mm.
Diabetes, if someone gets type 2 diabetes, and you put them on insulin, you put them on metformin, you put them on all these drugs, that's not treating the main issue. That's
Mm.
not treating carbohydrate poisoning and the metabolic issues. That's
Mm.
just, putting them in a cast, but not setting the bone,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, it's better, but it's not good. It's not good
So
enough. It's just our birthright to be healthy,
yeah.
and we're being robbed of that. And so that's all I'm trying to do is just give people back what they deserve and what belongs to them.
And it's like you say, like that part of the healthcare is actually good. Like we need that. But
Mm,
when it comes to chronic illnesses, I think the main problem is, like you said before, that we have the problem we're trying to solve is not correct. If you don't know what
mhm.
the problem is, you cannot
Yeah,
start finding solutions because you have the problem wrong. And right now we're blaming the immune system incorrectly because
yeah.
it's not the immune system's fault. And the treatment shouldn't be lowering the immune system because that causes other issues.
It's really just that. I mean, we deserve to be healthy. We are designed to be healthy. We're born to be healthy. And so if we're not healthy, something has happened to us. We should think about it that way. And so there should be something that we can do or change or alter or remove or add that can bring us back to that healthy state. And that's largely from nutrition, but it's not only that, but it's this cocktail of harmful
Mm.
exposures and a lack of appropriate nutrition and inputs. And so we're getting
Oh,
the wrong inputs and we're getting the wrong outputs as a result of that. And if we just can correct that, then most people will be very healthy. And then we'd have so many more resources that could go to those people who actually really need it rather than everybody else who is just getting sick because we're doing the wrong things to ourselves.
yeah. And I think a lot of the times we make assumption also about the body. I've heard people talking about the microbiome and how we should eat the rainbow to get more
Mhm.
diversity in the microbes. And sometimes I just think, okay, but why? Why does
Mm.
more mean better?
Yeah.
Like, did you come
And
to
what's
that
the
conclusion?
evidence for that? You know,
Yeah,
there isn't any.
exactly. And also with fiber, they say like, oh, you cannot have proper bowel movements if you don't eat
Mm,
a bunch of vegetables.
tell that to the
Oh,
Sammy.
or go
Yeah.
keto yourself or carnivore and see how much it improves your bowel movement. Like now it's like heaven every time you go to the toilet. Before it was like the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, it doesn't matter what they say if it doesn't line up with reality,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that if you're a scientist, you want to be proven wrong, right? So that you can come closer to the truth.
Yeah, and understanding things, and that's the whole point of the scientific method is you try to design a study or a test that can invalidate what your claim is. You try to prove it wrong, and if you don't have a study design that is designed to prove it wrong, well then it's not a very good study design. It has to be capable of proving you wrong. And
Agree.
so, do you actually want to know what the answer is, or do you just want people to think you're smart and to get and manufacture the result that you want for some other purpose? The purpose of the scientific method is to actually find out what is happening in the world, and it's a series of systems and techniques to elicit what is happening in the real world and to understand the natural laws and of biology and physics and chemistry, etc. And
Mm.
so if you purposefully design things in your favor, you're
Yeah.
not doing yourself any favors, yeah, because you're not actually finding out anything worthwhile.
Mm.
You're just playing games. And sometimes people do that on purpose. And especially the ones that understand that the most, they understand how to design things in ways that they're going to get the answer that they want.
Yeah.
And then they publish that and they publish it in ways that say, oh, look, this looks fine. So peer reviewers go, yeah, look, I guess that's what it is, but it's complete and utter fraud. And just like the tobacco companies did, the sugar companies did and do, food companies
Mm.
do, and all these other sort of companies keep pushing this stuff out there to the point that the editor in chief of the Lancet, which is one of the top medical journals in the world, one of
Yeah.
the longtime editors, and at one point editor in chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the top medical journal in the world, they have independently said that you cannot trust the medical literature anymore, the scientific literature anymore. It's so corrupt, and that a good portion of it, at least half, by their words, at least half is either completely false or even fraudulent. And so, and that came from years as editors and editor in chief of the top medical journals in the world. And that's just something we just have to understand, that there are competing interests here, and they're not necessarily for our best interest.
100%. But certain things when it comes to the immune system, like vitamin C. if you can just go over like, do we need to eat fruits and berries to get a lot of vitamin C to support our immune systems?
No, you get plenty of vitamin C from meat as long as you're not eating carbohydrates with it. Carbohydrates and vitamin C compete for binding in and absorption in your gut. And so you
Mm.
just need thousands of times less or more vitamin C if you're ketogenic, if you're not eating that with carbohydrates. And then there's other anti-nutrients that will block out absorption in other ways as well. Fiber itself can block out up to 30% of nutrient absorption also by being a physical barrier to nutrient absorption or binding bile and reducing fatty acid uptake and fat-soluble vitamin absorption as well. And that's a well-known phenomenon. And so you just need far less vitamin C depending on what you're eating. So you just need a different constellation of nutrients depending on what you're eating. And so vitamin C is definitely one of those. And then, what do you need vitamin C for? For your immune system? Sure, it shows up. But a large portion of that vitamin C that we think we need is to make collagen, but it's to catalyze a reaction that hydrolyzes proline and lysine. So catalyzes means it speeds up a reaction. Doesn't mean it's required for the reaction, it just speeds it up. So that reaction is happening anyway. This just speeds it up, and other things can potentially speed it up as well. However, you get hydrolyzed proline and lysine already from eating meat. So you actually skip that step. So you actually don't need vitamin C as much or at all to make properly formed collagen as long as you're eating enough of those precursors and factors like the hydrolyzed proline and lysine from the collagen in the meat that you're eating. So you absorb far more, so you need to eat far less, and then you're only using it for certain things. You're not using a majority of this stuff for your collagen because you're already making collagen by other means. And so the amount that you need is far, far less. And there are people that are they're doing this and doing carnivore and they check their vitamin C and it's perfect. So it's like, okay, well, where's that coming from? Look at the Maasai. They drink milk and milk has carbohydrates in it. So they're actually blocking out a lot of that vitamin C. And yet they're not getting scurvy. They're not getting vitamin C deficiency. They're still healthy as hell. So no, we just we look at the RDAs. RDAs, recommended daily allowances were made at a time that everyone was eating a mixed diet. It was in that context of a mixed diet. And it just is simply not accurate to transpose that onto people eating other ways. It does matter. Depending on what you eat, it changes what you need to eat and how your body processes those nutrients and what you demand.
Yeah. What do you think about eating raw foods like raw meat and
Yeah.
stuff like that? Because some of the vitamins in the meat are sensitive to heat, for example. So cooking, it reduces phytochemicals in plants, but it also reduces some of the nutrients from meat. Like the B
Mhm.
vitamins are more sensitive. So what do you believe about raw meat, or should you cook it medium rare or
Well, that's the thing. So we've known this for hundreds of years that when you cook meat or food generally, it will denature some things, but it will also allow for more bioavailability in other things. Like it'll create more bioavailability of certain proteins, for example. You just think of like the connective tissue in a tough brisket or something like that. That big gristly sort of chunks in there. Like you're not breaking that down very well. But if you slow cook it, it will break that collagen down, that tissue down. And now it's more bioavailable, and you'll be able to get more of those nutrients out of there. But other ones you'll lose. And so, like you mentioned with B vitamins, if you cook meat well done, you can lose up to 30 to 40% of the B vitamins. Okay, so that's going to be less. That's objectively less. And you're going to denature taurine. You're going to lose some of the taurine. You're going to lose some of the glutamine. But you're going to get a lot of them anyway. And we've been cooking meat for at least 1.6 million years. So whatever happens to meat when you cook it, we're well designed and adapted to it. There is a difference between grass-fed, finished, pasture-raised beef or wild game, and they're
yeah.
much more nutritious. So if you're cooking that, you're going to lose 40% of a higher number. So that could well done wild reindeer from the
Mm.
north of Scandinavia is
Mhm.
probably going to be more nutritious than a grain finished cow. I
Yeah.
don't know exact numbers, but you could think about it in sort of that way that you're going to be dropping down from a larger size pie. Do you need all those nutrients? If you're low on B vitamins and B12, great, cook it less. Sear the
Mhm.
I just prefer it anyway. I like searing the outside and leaving the inside rare. I taste
Mhm.
better to me. I always feel better doing that as well. But, I think that the main thing is you're going to get the majority of the benefit from just eating meat and cutting out all the other things. And then you can sort of quibble over how much you cook it or not. I
Yeah.
think you're going to get the biggest improvement just cutting out all that crap. And so, then you get to there and they say, okay, if you like it less cooked, great. You sear the outside, you leave the inside raw. You're preserving a lot of those nutrients, and you're getting some more of the nutrients in the cooked part as well. That allow you for that allow that denature and sort of allow those to be more bioavailable as well. There's so many different dishes that are raw meat. Steak tartare, steak carpaccio, sashimi, all these sorts of things, and so many more. I mean, if you just Google all the different raw meat dishes around the world, I mean, there's dozens and dozens and dozens. And
Yes.
just a rare steak, the inside is
Yeah.
raw. That's what raw meat tastes like. It tastes good, right? And
Mm.
so I don't think there's anything wrong with that as long as you're careful about contaminants. I'm not in the camp that you should be eating rotten,
Yeah.
salmonella-ridden meat with E. coli all of it. I just don't agree with that. I've absolutely seen people on a carnivore diet start eating raw, and they left it out of the refrigerator and it started to spoil, and they got sick from that and they had to go to the hospital. I have seen that. And they were very, very sick, and they had to be on high dose antibiotics for 6 days in one case. So that's very different. And there's going to be different things that can grow on it. Different bacteria can be very, very harmful and very toxic and make you very sick. And other, different sort of molds and fungus, not
Yeah.
necessarily as bad. It depends on what is growing on it. And the other
Yes.
thing is that parasites. There's an idea that parasites actually go out and clean out your body. It was like, well, tell that to all the millions of people that die from malaria every year, because
Yeah.
those are parasites, and those cause a huge burden of disease and death around the
Mm.
world. And well, those parasites don't come from what you ate. So, okay, so only food parasites are good for you, but all other parasites are bad for you. You have to think about these things all the way through to the end. If parasites are just good for you, then they shouldn't be causing disease at all. But we see a huge burden of disease. And then the idea is like, well, maybe it's just that they're sick anyway and the parasites are helping you. And then it's like blaming firemen on the fires. Well,
Yeah.
no, because when you get rid of the parasites, the problem goes away. And you didn't have a
Exactly.
problem without the parasites. And then you did have a problem with the parasites, and you get rid of the parasites, and now the problem's gone. And
Exactly.
those studies have been done. But that's another thing that people just aren't aware of the literature, and they say, "Oh, it's never been proven that it has actually. It actually has." And there absolutely are published studies going back to the 1800s showing that. I mean, it was long, long, long time. Doing neurosurgery, I mean, you only have to see, one case of people with parasites in their brains causing massive neurological issues and seizures, and then you remove them and they improve. You only have to
Mm.
see that one time to be like, absolutely don't want
Exactly.
those in my body. Right.
It
Yeah. And, so the thing is that if you're healthy and you do
Mm.
get exposed to parasites, it is less likely that they'll cause disease because you have an immune system that are going to keep it in check. It is the case that if your immune system is depressed, then those parasites can be a much bigger problem. But you can still get disease. I mean, you still get malaria with a perfectly good immune system, and you can still get other sort of parasites. It's a parasite. It's still taking away from you. It's drinking your blood. It's taking your nutrients. So at the very least, it's a drag on your body
Mm.
and on your health,
Mm. Mm.
and it can cause very serious disease as well. If this stuff was just good for us and we wanted all this stuff, why do we have an immune system, part of our immune system, that its sole purpose is fighting parasites?
Yeah.
Riddle me that. And so,
Uh,
look, someone wants to go out and expose themselves to these things, they can do whatever the hell they want. I
well,
don't recommend it because,
yeah.
I'm a doctor, and if I tell people, yeah, it's totally fine, and one person gets a parasite issue or gets food poisoning from it, I lose my license.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like that's obviously not something I'm going to do. And I don't think it's responsible to do. And it's not just like I have to protect myself. I don't think that that's true. I don't think that
Yes.
it's true that you
I'm agree
can't
with
get
it.
food poisoning from
Mm.
spoiled meat. I don't think it's true that you can't get a parasitic infection and get damaged by those parasites from eating contaminated meat. I don't believe that. And so I'm not going to say that. But if
Yeah.
you're careful about contamination and you're
Yeah.
careful about parasites and things like that, there's
Mm.
nothing inherently wrong with raw meat. Raw meat is very healthy. Raw meat is very
Mm.
good for you. There's no problem with that. I think that probably the main driver for cooking meat 1.6 million years ago and beyond was that it killed those parasites, and it
Parasites.
actually
Yeah.
helped us avoid disease and infections and things like that. I think that's probably a big survival advantage that it gave. And remember that Homo sapiens only came around about 300,000, maybe 500,000 years ago. Recent data is sort of coming out saying that. But we've been cooking meat for over 1 million years longer than that. So Homo sapiens evolved from humans who ate cooked meat.
Yes.
So, I think that you do what the hell you want, just be careful of contamination.
Yeah, exactly. I do agree with you because I see also a lot of people have a histamine intolerance. So aged meats can sometimes trigger things for those people. Um, and I wouldn't want parasites either.
Mm.
I think that it can be good to like cook the meat on the outside. Also, there are ways that you can do it also so to lessen the parasites. Like if there were potentially some parasites in ruminant animals like lamb or cow, you can freeze it in the freezer for like 3 days, and it will kill off a lot of the parasites and potential harm that your body can go
Yeah.
through. But also with the MTHFR gene, it can make it hard for us to convert nutrients in the body. But they have seen that if you eat things like meat and eggs and stuff like that, then it's easy for the body because it can just pick it up as it is.
Look, if you're not getting enough B vitamins, for instance, like you have MTHFR, you have sort of a malabsorption issue, or you just have a higher demand, cooking meat less, or you're getting more of those B vitamins, might be a good idea. But also eating more nutrient dense things like more grass fed, finished, pasture raised examples, they have far higher, depending on the farm, far higher nutrient levels in that as well. Or liver, a bit of liver goes a long way. A couple ounces of liver 2-3 days a week generally fills in a lot of those gaps. And so, all the nutrients that you might be losing from cooking meat, you'll more than take care of by having a couple ounces of liver a few days a week as well. So there are a lot of different things that you can do. And so if you like raw meat and you're safe about the contamination, go for it,
Yeah.
and it's very healthy. It's very, very good. But there's no issues. I don't see any issues with that as long as you're safe about the contamination side of things. And if you just prefer cooked meat, fine. But just remember that you might lose some of those or you will lose some of those micronutrients, and that you might need a little bit more of them. So having a bit of liver, having a bit more nutrient dense sort of meat that will fill in those gaps is a good idea. But I think that the biggest difference comes from just eating meat and cutting out all the other things. And then there are ways of optimizing your nutrition and your health on a meat only diet, whether you cook it, whether you don't, whether it's somewhere in between. There are ways of getting everything that you need in the proportion that you need them, regardless of your preferences on how you cook it.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Dr. Anthony Chafee.
Yeah. Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Where can people find you? I
Mhm.
want them to find you.
Yeah. Well, I have a YouTube channel and a podcast where I talk about all this sort of stuff. My YouTube channel is just my name, Anthony Chafee, MD. That's the same as my Instagram channel. And my podcast is called The Plant Free MD. And that's any podcast platform that you might want to find. I have other socials as well. And I have a website where you can find all this sort of stuff, and I have a lot of resources and studies and papers and things like that where people can sort of look up a lot of different things. And that's just dranthonychafee.com. So dranthonychafee.com. And you can find everything else through there as well.
Yeah. Go check it out, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Bye
Yes.
bye.